My name's Ryan Miller, 31, single, and about 2 paychecks away from selling plasma again. The past year has been one long streak of almost landed a full-time gig, almost made rent on time, almost got my old truck to stop leaking oil. I was laid off from my warehouse job last March and have been piecing together side hustles ever since. DoorDash, junk hauling, flipping estate sale furniture. Anything that'll pay by the end of the week. That's how I got into storage units. It started simple. Buy a unit, dig through it, flip what you can. Sometimes it's just moldy couch cushions and old tax documents. Sometimes it's a vintage guitar, or someone's coin collection, or electronics they forgot they owned. You roll the dice, open the door, and pray something in there is worth more than the $300 you dropped on it. It's a little like gambling, but with fewer flashing lights and more dust. I started with the cheap ones, units nobody wanted, ones listed as unclaimed for 7+ years or owner deceased, the real junk piles, because once in a while, one of those turns up gold. Last Tuesday, I hit up an auction in Riverside, industrial part of town. Old lot tucked behind a shuttered Payless and a chain link fence that probably hadn't seen a coat of paint since the 90s. Only 5 units up for bidding, and most of the usual flippers were already zeroing in on a furniture-heavy one that looked like it might have mid-century chairs. But I noticed one off to the side, unit number 83. No photos, no description. Just unopened since 2012, no known contact, contents unknown. It had a red tag zip-tied to the lock, but no one else even glanced at it. Auctioneer said he'd include it at the end, but made no promises about what was inside. Might be totally empty. Might be full of rat droppings, might be mold. I won it for $120. Nobody else even bid. The lock was a thick brass one, different than the usual, almost military style. The guy running the place had to come out with bolt cutters, muttering the whole time about how the last person to rent it paid in cash and never answered their phone. When the door finally rolled up, I was hit with the unmistakable stale air smell, dust, rust, and a weird, cold, metallic tang, like old blood on a steel pipe. It wasn't empty. It wasn't packed either, but it was organized. That was the first weird part. Most units are just piles of forgotten crap. This one had everything arranged in neat rows. 2 plastic crates full of books, stacked and labeled. A standing wardrobe pushed against a back wall. And a workbench. A legit, full-sized workbench covered in tools I didn't recognize. Not your average garage stuff either. No hammers, no drills. There were blades, hooks, metal tools with etchings I couldn't read, things that looked custom-built for jobs I didn't want to know about. I stepped inside, on edge. The air felt heavy. I reached for my phone and started taking photos, just in case I needed proof of what I found. And then I noticed the wardrobe was bolted to the ground. Not just bolted, welded, as if someone really didn't want it moved. Curious, I walked over, opened it. Empty. Except the floor of it looked weird, thicker than it should have been. I knocked on it. Hollow. I dropped to my knees, ran my hand along the edge, and felt a tiny groove. A latch? A square of the floor popped up slightly. I grabbed the edge and lifted. Beneath the false bottom, there was a ladder. It disappeared into darkness. And I swear I felt cold air rising from it. I hesitated for a long minute. There wasn't any light coming up from the shaft, just that steady stream of cold air, like the unit was exhaling. The ladder was iron, old but solid, bolted to the inside of the hidden chamber. I couldn't see the bottom. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it down the hole. Concrete walls. The beam lit about 20 feet before it vanished into black. No obvious bottom, no smell, no sound. Just air, dry and stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I should have walked away, but I'd paid for this unit, which meant this was mine. Whatever was down there belonged to me now. I grabbed a wrench from the workbench and tucked it into my jacket pocket, just in case, and started climbing. The metal rungs creaked, but they held. 10 feet, 15, 20. The temperature dropped with every step until I was sweating with nerves but shivering from the cold. My boots touched concrete and I froze, letting the light sweep the room around me. It was a bunker, square-shaped. No windows, no door. Just concrete walls lined with industrial shelving and steel cases. A single bulb hung from the ceiling by a frayed wire, long dead. The air smelled like leather, dust, and something faintly electric. To my left, a row of black plastic bins. Each was labeled in faded white marker. Hunter Kit, number 3. Eastern variants. Photos, verified entities, 1972 to 2004. Salt, silver, bone. To my right, maps, dozens, folded, pinned, some spread out across a drafting table. Most had red markers, handwritten notes, strange coordinates. A few had faded stains, dark brownish red. I opened one of the kits, and inside, wooden stakes, carved and old. A revolver with strange engravings along the barrel. Vials of liquid, blue, amber, green, each labeled in shorthand. A notebook with half the pages torn out. The rest, notes, field notes. Dozens of entries, all in jagged handwriting. June 18th, 1996, Utah. Type 2 mimic, female presenting. Notes: took over local librarian's life, didn't feed for months, finally cracked and drained a family of 4, burned out the nest, no survivors, no backup. Still hearing it sometimes, in dreams. Not sure it's dead. I dropped the notebook and backed up. This was real. This was all real. I moved to the back wall, where a massive corkboard had been bolted in place. Strings ran between Polaroids, clippings, and hand-scribbled notes. It was like stepping into the middle of an investigation, one that spanned decades. The photos were what got me. Each one was labeled with a name, age, and location. At first glance, they looked normal. People at parks, bars, schools, walking down the street. But the longer I stared, the more wrong they became. One man's shadow didn't match his pose. One girl had no pupils. Another guy had no reflection in the window behind him. And then there was the last photo. It was tucked in the bottom corner of the board, half covered by a faded receipt and a push pin jammed in sideways. No name, no age, no location. Just a black and white Polaroid of a man standing in front of what looked like a motel room. Number 6B. He wore a long coat, hands in his pockets, and was looking straight at the camera. His face was clear, but the moment you focused on it, it felt like your eyes slid away. I blinked, looked again. He was smiling. Too wide. It was wrong. I pulled it from the board. On the back, in smudged pencil, was, "Do not engage. Follow-up required. See file 6B. I looked around. There were no drawers, no filing cabinets, just more crates and bins. Eventually, I spotted a trunk tucked behind a tarp and a rusted folding chair. Heavy thing. Inside, rows of manila folders marked with codes and dates. I dug until I found 6B. The file was slim. The first page was a map. Tennessee. A motel circled in blue ink. Room 6B. The caption next to it. Same subject, same face. 1983, 1996, 2009, 2022. Unconfirmed. Moving west. The next few pages were photos. Not the creepy kind. Just surveillance-style shots. Blurry zooms of the same man in different places. Different clothes. Always alone. Always looking toward the camera. Never aging. Then came the field notes. Typed. No header. No names. Encounter outside Motel 6B. Chattanooga outskirts. Male subject observed entering and exiting room without ever using a key. Same walk, same posture, same facial structure as 1996 incident, confirmed by 2 prior agents. 2 locals reported missing. Their cell phones pinged near the motel before going dark. Blood trace found in drain behind Unit 6B. DNA inconclusive. Local PD unaware. We pulled out before they could question. No viable way to stop him. Tracked him west, maybe using the train system. Rarely sleeps. Eyes glow under infrared. That was it. The file ended with a printed screenshot, a time-stamped security cam still from a train station somewhere in Kansas. The same man, same coat, same face, looking up at the camera, eyes faintly lit. My skin went cold. There were at least 20 other files like this in the trunk. I skimmed a few. Different creatures, different sightings. Some local. Riverside, Bakersfield. One said something about feral changelings near a rest stop on I-5. Another was just labeled Chatterbox and marked with a blood stain on the inside of the folder. But this one, this 6B thing, it wasn't just a random sighting. Whoever ran this place, they were watching him for decades. And then they stopped. No closure, no success, no confirmation. Just one last sighting 3 years ago. And then nothing. I stood there, holding that photo, and suddenly the whole bunker felt smaller, like the walls had moved an inch closer while I was reading. My phone buzzed. Low battery. I didn't like being down here anymore. I carefully put the file back, relocked the trunk, took one last look at the board. That photo, I shouldn't have pulled it off. I pinned it back in place, just like it had been. The man in the coat stared back. Crooked smile, cold eyes. Same door behind him. Room 6B. Same feeling in my gut. Like he was looking at me. I backed away, turned off the light, and climbed the ladder without looking down. I shut the unit. rolled the door down, locked it, even looped the old red tag back through the latch like that would somehow seal everything back inside. I knew it was stupid, but it made me feel better. The whole drive home, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Back at the apartment, I dropped my keys, kicked off my boots, and fell onto the futon. No lights, no dinner, just the silence and the leftover cold. It was too much. The tools, the files, the wall of faces. The man in that photo, standing in front of the motel door, looking like he knew something I didn't. I mean, it had to be a prank, right? Some elaborate setup? Like one of those immersive escape rooms for horror fans. But that didn't explain the age of the paper, or the dust, or the photo timestamp from 1983 printed on the back of that motel picture. I didn't mean to fall asleep, but sometime after the second hour of lying there with my heart pounding, I crashed hard, and I dreamed. Me standing in the storage unit with the door open, looking down into the hole. The ladder stretched longer than before, vanishing into pitch black. Something was moving down there, breathing. I woke up sweating. Late afternoon sun was bleeding through the blinds. For a few minutes, I just lay there, frozen, staring at the ceiling. Then I sat up, grabbed my backpack, and repacked it. Flashlight, wrench, power bank, granola bar, and bottled water. I tossed in some gloves this time too. I told myself I just wanted one more look, to see it again in the daylight. Maybe take a proper video. Something to prove to myself it had really happened. But I knew the truth. I wasn't done with it. And it wasn't done with me. By the time I got back to the storage lot, the sun was already starting to dip behind the old strip mall across the street. I parked around the side so no one would see me from the road. Unit 83 was still closed, still locked, still exactly as I'd left it. But now I had the key. I unlocked the latch, pulled open the door, and for a second, I half expected everything to be gone. The tools, the wardrobe, the cold air, like maybe I'd imagined it all. But it was there, just as I left it. The same heavy silence hit me the second I stepped inside. I pulled the door down behind me and clicked on the flashlight, walked straight to the wardrobe, opened the hidden panel, and stared down into the dark. I took a deep breath and started climbing. The ladder groaned, metal cold through my gloves, and I moved slower this time. I just wanted to see every detail clearly. I wanted to understand. When my boots hit concrete again, I turned in a full circle, letting the flashlight sweep the place. Same bunker, same wall of bins and crates, same map table, cork board, trunk in the corner. But this time, I didn't go for the files. I walked to the board. I stared at the photo of the man in front of Motel 6B. His coat looked old, like wool. His hands were still in his pockets. His shoes were polished, but there was something in his posture, not relaxed, but ready, like he just heard something behind the camera. I pinned it back exactly where it'd been, then turned toward the metal shelving along the far wall. Most of it held gear, kits, boxes labeled in shorthand I couldn't decode. One shelf had sealed cases filled with old camcorders, DV tapes, and thick black cords. I opened one of the tapes, and the label read, 6B, Daylight, Stationary Cam, 2009. I didn't have a way to play it. But there were at least 6 more tapes with the same code, some older, some marked no audio or do not watch alone. I moved on. There was another primary bin labeled Entity Logs, Classified, Primary Threats. I cracked it open. Inside, there were spiral notebooks, half-filled legal pads, printed email threads with most of the lines blacked out. I flipped through until something stopped me. A page near the back of one legal pad, sketched by hand, almost like a courtroom artist's drawing. The man from the photo. Only now, he had features. Wrong ones. Longer fingers, the mouth opened wider. Strange teeth. His eyes were gone. Just dark hollows, smudged like the ink had been rubbed after drawing them. Beneath it, written in pencil, "Smile does not move, only grows." I set the pad down carefully and turned to the final shelf. This one had just a single locked black box. On top was a note. "If found, do not act alone. See logbook Red A." Red A wasn't anywhere I could see. No shelf label. No box that matched. I stepped back and looked at everything again. This wasn't a workshop. It was a war room. And whoever had used it last, they were losing. I scanned the bunker one more time, slower this time, letting my eyes follow the edges, the seams, the shadows. There was something here I hadn't noticed, something I'd missed. In the far corner, past the ammo crates, past a stack of burlap sacks labeled bone dust, clean, there was a filing cabinet, a short one, wedged tight against the wall under an old coat rack as if someone had tried to hide it behind junk. The bottom drawer was dented, locked, but the top was already slightly open. I knelt down. Inside, just one thing, a red journal, leather cover, curled at the edges. No title, just a burn mark near the corner that looked like a branded letter, or maybe a symbol. The light caught it just enough for me to make out Red A. I sat down on the concrete floor and opened it carefully. The handwriting was tight, mechanical. No wasted loops or flourishes. This wasn't someone venting their feelings. This was documentation. A ledger. The first half was filled with creature profiles. Names, types, weaknesses, classifications. Most I didn't recognize. But around the halfway point, a new heading was scribbled in darker ink. 6B, code, blackout. I turned the page. First sighting verified 1952, Missouri. Confirmed visual match to 1967, 1981, 2009. Same face, same clothing. No signs of age. Attempts to follow unsuccessful. Entity enters room 6B. Door closes. Exit never witnessed. There were location tags, all rural, all isolated, all motels with the same floor layout, same numbered door. Feeds discreetly, it read. Always leaves town before full investigation. Evidence suggests does not kill indiscriminately. Targets chosen. Patterns unclear. Then a list of names, cities, victims. All disappeared. It read silver ineffective, religious symbols ineffective. Subject maintains human appearance in daylight, nighttime behavior unknown. No footage confirmed. Another page, then a sketch. Crude, pencil on paper. A figure in a coat, except the coat was drawn open, and underneath it wasn't flesh. It was segmented and rib-like. The chest was split open, almost like insect wings folded out from the center. Dozens of thin, clawed arms extended from the cavity. The caption beneath it chilled me. Final form observed. Hunter R. Whitlock, last seen 2009, Georgia. Presumed dead. This was it? This was the last entry. It read, tracked to roadside motel, room 6B. Confirmed subject still active. No exit observed. Waited 9 hours. Approached at 2:31 a.m. Knocked. Door opened. He was inside, awake, standing, like he expected me. The writing got worse near the bottom, slanted, rushed. It read, I fired 3 shots into the chest, point blank, center mass. Subject did not fall. He smiled and said my name. The final sentence wasn't written. It was carved, pressed so hard into the paper, the page beneath had nearly torn. It read, how did he know my name? That was it. I closed the journal and sat in silence. For a long time, I didn't move, didn't think. My hands felt numb, and the concrete floor beneath me felt colder. There was no dramatic twist, no final answer, just a dead end with one terrifying truth. Whoever this monster hunter was, he failed. And the thing he was tracking, it's still out there. I sat there for what felt like an hour, the red journal heavy in my lap. I wasn't a monster hunter. I didn't know spells. I didn't even own a gun. But the idea of walking away, of knowing this thing was out there and doing nothing, that was worse. If I couldn't stop it, maybe I could do the next best thing. Figure out who it was going after next. And try to save him. I packed up the red journal, snapped a few more photos of the room and the cork board, and climbed back up the ladder. When I reached the top, I shut the false bottom and locked the wardrobe back in place. The air in the unit felt thicker now, like it knew what I'd seen. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with the journal laid down in front of me, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. The names in the file were mostly first names only, no last names. Some just locations and ages. A lot of them were dated 1981, 1996, 2009, always spaced about 13 years apart, which meant if the last confirmed sighting was 2009, then 2022 was the next cycle. We were already in it. The sketch in the journal showed a motel door, room 6B. I checked online, figured it'd be a stretch, but maybe there was a connection. It took me 3 hours, but eventually I found it. A motel off the I-10, a few miles outside a small town in central Texas. Still had an active listing online. One of the photos showed the layout of the building. And there it was, room 6B. Same numbers, same exterior, same corner tree. My stomach dropped. I called the number on the website, and a woman answered. She sounded tired. I asked if someone was staying in room 6B, said I was doing some family history and was curious. She said no. That room was booked out long term. A man, quiet, paid in cash, been there 6 weeks. I asked for a name. She paused, said she couldn't share that. But then she slipped up, muttered something under her breath. That guy gives me the creeps. That was all I needed. I packed a bag, just essentials. Phone, flashlight, snacks, journal. Then I stopped myself. The silver hook. I didn't know what it was for, just that it was old, heavy, and carved with symbols I couldn't read. I threw it in anyway. What was I even gonna do? Knock on the guy's door, tell him I knew he was a centuries-old monster and that, he should probably cut it out. No. But I could watch. I could wait. I could see if someone else showed up. And maybe, just maybe, I could figure out who this thing was going after. The drive took a day and a half. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Didn't post about it online. Just drove, checked into a cheap roadside inn a mile away, and waited. I parked across from the motel each night, using a pair of old binoculars I found in a thrift store on the way. Room 6B had the curtains drawn. Every night, between 2 and 3 a.m., the light came on. No one ever entered. No one ever left. But on the 4th night, a car pulled in around midnight. A woman stepped out. Young, probably early 20s. Long dark hair, backpack slung over one shoulder. She walked to the lobby, checked in, and was handed a key. 6A, right next to him. I watched her enter, door closed, light on. My hands started sweating. The night passed. Nothing happened. Next night, same routine. Light in 6B came on, then off. Nothing else. But on the 3rd night after she arrived, she came out to smoke. It was around 1:45 a.m. I saw her lean on the railing, staring off into the woods behind the building. She looked tense. Not scared exactly, just off, like she hadn't been sleeping well. I took a photo of her car, checked the plates, ran them through a public records database I paid $15 to access. Her name was Kelsey Romero, 23, from Phoenix. No criminal record, nothing weird, just normal. Which meant she fit the profile. The others in the Red A journal, they didn't seem like bad people, just unlucky. I drove back to the motel, heart pounding, sat in the dark and stared at the file. And then I did the one thing I told myself I wouldn't do. I drove to the motel, parked, got out, and I walked up to her room. I knocked. After a long second, the door cracked open. She looked through the chain, cautiously. Yeah? Sorry, I said quickly. My name's Ryan. Look, I know this is gonna sound insane, but I need to talk to you. Just give me 2 minutes, okay? If it sounds crazy, I'll leave. She didn't answer right away. Just stood there with her hand on the door, her eyes flicking from my face to the parking lot behind me. I could tell she was calculating whether to slam the door or scream. Look, I'm not a creep, I added. I swear, Look, I've been researching this place. Room 6B. That did something. Her face twitched. A flicker of recognition, or maybe fear. The door opened another inch. What about 6B? I pulled the photo from my jacket. The black and white Polaroid, faded at the corners but still clear. The man in the long coat, standing in front of her exact room number. I found this in a locked file. It was taken here. Same room, same building. There's a note on the back that says not to engage, that this guy, whoever he is, he shows up every 13 years. She looked at the photo. I could see the moment it landed, the way her posture stiffened. She glanced back inside, then quickly back at me. And then without warning, the hallway light above us buzzed hard and died. The fixture gave one final flicker and blinked out, leaving a faint electrical hum in the silence. Through the gap in her doorway, I could see her bedside lamp flicker, dim, then return to normal. She sucked in a breath. I didn't say anything, just stood there and let it settle. After a second, she stepped out and closed the door behind her, still wary. But something had shifted. "You've got 1 minute," she said. "Start talking." We sat on the low curb outside her room. She kept her arms folded, like she didn't know whether to punch me or run. I laid the photo flat between us on the concrete. "Your room is part of something that goes back decades," I said. "I don't have all the answers, but I found a bunker, literally, a hidden bunker, under a storage unit I bought last week. It belonged to someone who tracked things, creatures. This guy was the last one he wrote about." She said nothing, just stared at the Polaroid. The man's wide smile, the way the trees behind him seemed to ripple slightly, even in still print. "There were files," I went on. "Maps, case notes. Every 13 years, someone dies in or near room 6B. Always the same man. They called him Mr. Six." She finally looked up at me. "And you're what? Some kind of ghost hunter now?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm just a guy who bought a unit he shouldn't have. But I believe what I saw, and I think you're in danger." She looked away, chewing her cheek. The lamp inside her room flickered again. I heard scratching," she said. "Last night. Behind the wall. I thought it was rats or something, but the door to 6B, it's sealed. There's no way anything could get in there." I hesitated. There were scratches in that room before, in one of the old reports. Same place, I think. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I should just leave." I didn't argue. I just nodded. That's probably smart. She stared at the photo again. That same faded Polaroid, the man in front of room 6B, coat hanging past his knees, that too wide smile. Her eyes stayed on it longer this time. "You really think this guy's gonna come back?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. "I don't think he ever left." The lamp behind her flickered again. One hard pulse, like a dying heartbeat, then steadied. We both looked at the door to 6B. It was still sealed, still dark, but I could feel it, like the hallway itself leaned in closer when she said the words. "I need to pack," she muttered. "I'm not staying another night." She stood up and moved toward the door. I followed her. "Can I help?" I asked. "At least until you're in your car?" She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, still thinking, still cautious. Then finally, Yeah, fine. Just don't touch anything." Inside, the room looked normal, lived in. Clothes in a half-open suitcase, makeup bag on the sink, TV remote wedged between the bedspread and a wrinkled hoodie. But something felt very wrong. She moved quickly, started gathering shirts, her charger, while I stood by the door, eyes fixed on the connecting wall to 6B. It was quiet. Too quiet. And then something tapped once. Faint, like a fingernail brushing wood. She froze. I looked over. She'd stopped halfway through folding a jacket. The noise didn't come again. "You heard that, right?" I nodded. She zipped the suitcase and stood. "Okay, that's it. I'm out," she said. We were halfway to the door when the TV behind us turned on. No sound, just a blank screen with faint static bars drifting side to side, like water damage. A shape formed for a second, maybe a figure, then it was gone. I unplugged it. The screen stayed on for 1 second longer than it should have. She looked at me. "Yeah, I am not sleeping in here again." We stepped outside. She locked the door with shaking hands and turned to me. "Okay, I'm gonna grab a coffee or something, drive until sunrise, maybe call my brother in the morning." I nodded, but I could feel the hairs on my neck rising. There was a man standing at the far end of the lot. He was perfectly still and facing us. He hadn't been there a second ago. "Don't look," I said. "Just get in the car." She turned away, froze. He was gone. No footsteps, no motion, just vanished behind the edge of the vending machines. She unlocked the driver door, and I stepped back. She paused. "Wait," she began. "What about you?" "I'll be fine," I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she got in, slammed the door, and turned the key. The engine wouldn't start. First time, nothing. Second, just a sputter. Third, the headlights flickered once, then off. He was back. Closer now. Halfway across the lot. He wasn't walking. He was floating. Just a slow, steady glide. The lights overhead began to shut off one by one. Each bulb fizzed out in perfect rhythm, heading straight toward us, like someone hitting dominoes. With everyone that died, the darkness got thicker. Not just darker, but thicker, like the shadows were crawling inward. Kelsey turned. "Car, now." We ran. I dropped the photo in the gravel. Didn't matter anymore. She fumbled with the keys, yanked the driver's side door open, and threw herself inside. I was right behind her, sliding into the passenger seat as she jammed the key into the ignition. Nothing. She swore under her breath and tried again. Still nothing. Outside, the last motel light above her door sputtered. Glass rained down. Now it was just us, the car, and the dark. And him. I looked up. He was closer now. Halfway across the lot, had become 10 feet. His face was still pointed right at us, though his head never moved. His eyes didn't blink. And his smile, that never changed. That wrong, too wide smile, like he had all the time in the world. "Kelsey." "I know," she snapped, twisting the key again. This time the dashboard lights fluttered weakly. A pulse, then dead again. I was breathing too fast. My chest burned. The cold inside the car was worse than it had been outside, like the heater had flipped to reverse. And then I remembered. The hook. The silver hook with the symbols carved into it. The one from the bunker. I didn't know what it did. I didn't know if it would work. But it had been packed with salt, silver, and bone. I remembered that. And it was still in my jacket. I yanked it out, flipping the blade open. It wasn't sharp in the usual way. It looked ceremonial. Used, not crafted. The etchings were dull, worn from blood or time, or both. Kelsey saw it and flinched. "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer. I just opened the door and got out. He was 5 feet away now. Still not moving fast, just steady, like he was following a line nobody else could see. I raised the hook. His head tilted, just slightly. The smile stayed, but his glide, it stopped. It was small, barely a pause, but it was enough. I stepped forward, holding the thing out in front of me like a crucifix. My hand was shaking. Back off, I said. My voice barely came out. He didn't react, just floated there, watching. And then something flickered behind his eyes. A twitch. And the lights on the car flicked back on. Kelsey, I said, try it now. The engine turned over once, then again, and then roared to life. Headlights cut through the dark. The figure didn't flinch. He just turned his head the tiniest degree and looked straight into the beam. The smile dropped. I didn't wait. I ran back to the passenger side, dove in, and slammed the door. Go. She threw it in reverse so hard I thought the transmission would stop. We fishtailed, skidded, then slammed it into drive and took off down the road, gravel and dust flying up behind us. I looked back once. He hadn't followed. He was still standing there in the parking lot, long coat hanging still, one hand lifted like he was waving. And the lights behind him, the ones that had gone out, they stayed dark. We didn't speak on the drive, just kept checking the rearview mirror over and over. I dropped her off at a diner 20 miles out. Bright lights, other people. Told her to stay inside until morning. She didn't argue. When I got home, I moved fast. Grabbed clothes, food, anything I could carry. But just before I left, I spotted it. A scrap of paper, dead center on the kitchen counter. 5 words in thick, uneven ink. It read, "The light won't save you." I didn't stop to think. I didn't look around. I just ran out, slammed the door, and drove. We didn't go home after that. We met at the storage unit the next day. And we have been in the bunker for 3 months. We keep the salt lines fresh. Every door, every vent, every crack. I check them twice a day, sometimes 3. Twice now. We found footprints just outside the salt. Never closer. She took the side room. Just a cot and a light. She doesn't talk much, but she hasn't laughed. And that tells me everything I need to know. We live off canned food, bottled water, and paranoia. We've got every file spread out across the table. Every photo, every old report. We have memorized the map. Red pins for sightings, black pins for kills. 1 white pin for us. We're the only survivors so far. We don't sleep well. She keeps her boots on. I sleep with a hunter's revolver under my pillow. Not that it would help. It didn't help him. And every night, just after midnight, the motion light above the steel hatch clicks on for half a second. Just once. Like a reminder. We don't talk about it. We just keep researching, planning, preparing. Because we got lucky once. And that's all it was. That was not a plan. That was a fluke. So now we work. She scans case files. I trace old sightings, build timelines, check names. We pin everything to the wall. Hotel registries, death reports, power outages, police calls that never made the news. And we've started to notice patterns. He always moves before the 13th year ends. Always changes names, changes cities. But the same face. The same grin, and the same door, 6B. I don't know if we can stop him. I don't think we can, but maybe we can get in the way. Last week, we found a case from 1970, Arkansas motel, same layout. Housekeeper vanished, no body, room sealed. A photo turned up in the same file, same man, same coat, same smile. We circled the next target on the map. It's only 6 months away. But this time, we'll be there first. We've learned more now. And sure, yeah, the odds are still against us. But we know to stay in daylight, to never sleep near the door, to bring salt, silver, and real cameras, not phones. We don't know why, but digital doesn't catch him right. Film does. We keep our bags packed. We stay off main roads. She's better with people, so she handles check-ins. I handle the maps, the gear, the exits. We don't try to be heroes. Just fast, quiet, sharp enough to spot the pattern before the thing in the coat shows up. We're not winning, but we're gonna save who we can.
My name is Jason, and I used to think I was going to save the planet. You know the type, public school, eco club president, wore a recycled bottle hoodie for 2 years, yelled at people who didn't separate their trash. That was me. I used to collect rainwater in a secondhand fish tank just to water my tiny balcony garden. I thought every little thing counted. I still do, kind of. I went to school for environmental science. 4 years of soil reports, carbon math, and professors who wore trail shoes to class. I was going to work for a nonprofit, live out of a van if I had to, protest pipelines, get arrested for the right reasons. Instead, I spent most of last year organizing spreadsheets for a recycling firm that didn't even recycle half the time. They just sorted waste for someone else to throw away more efficiently. I quit after 8 months. Told myself it was temporary. Graduation was a blur. All my friends were talking about internships, fellowships, next steps. I was smiling for pictures and pretending I had a plan. I didn't expect anybody from my family to show up. Most of them were too far away or too old to travel. But just after they called my name and I walked across the stage, I saw her in the crowd. My grandmother, Miss Hazel. Purple church hat. Sunglasses, big smile like she'd been there the whole time. After the ceremony, we sat under a tree while people packed up around us. She handed me an envelope with $200 and told me I'd done well enough for now. Then she said, "Come learn the family business." I thought she meant real estate or insurance. Maybe one of those city jobs my cousins like to name drop when they wanted to sound like they were doing something respectable. I never really asked what Grandma did for work. Not properly. I had a vague memory of a corner shop from when I was little. The kind of place with sticky floors and too many smells competing for attention. Bread, bleach, beans, old sugar. I remembered getting scolded once for knocking over a jar of something that definitely wasn't meant for kids. There was always a line, too. People waited for canned goods, produce, bags of rice. Some of them looked tired. Some didn't quite look like people. That was Grandma's shop in Harlem. She called it Marva's Market and Goods, like it was just another mom-and-pop bodega on the block. But it wasn't. Turns out, she sells groceries to monsters. That part took me a while to understand. No one bothered to hide it from me, but no one bothered to explain it either. Grandma's never been big on explanations. She always figured if you were old enough to ask, you were old enough to see for yourself. The shop runs like any other place during the day. Collard greens in crates out front, coffee by the gallon behind the counter, a stack of lottery tickets next to the register. But once the sun goes down, something changes. A door opens in the back. An actual hidden door behind an old bookshelf. And the shop becomes something else entirely. That's the real business. Roots in jars, bones in paper, candles with handwritten labels, herbs you don't find at bodegas unless you know how to ask. There's a back room that smells like smoke and salt and cinnamon, and every shelf feels like it's been there 100 years. Some of them probably have. Grandma's a witch, a real witch. Not the costume kind, or the weird Etsy people who sell self-branded tea. She's the kind that learned everything from her mother, who learned it from hers, and so on and so forth. Old Southern root work, passed down through hands and lots of stories by the stove. Grandma is who people go to when they need a problem solved the supernatural way. I grew up around it. Holidays spent sweeping the floor, wrapping bundles, writing labels, but I was never taught what anything meant. Grandma kept me just far enough outside the circle to stay safe. But now that I'm grown, she says it's time to learn. She says the shop's gonna be mine someday, and I need to know what I'm inheriting. So here I am, 6 months in, learning the ropes, watching my grandmother light candles and mix oils like it's no big deal, helping werewolves pick shampoo, ringing up ghost customers who leave payment in old coins that melt if you stare too long. It's a lot, but I'm starting to get the hang of it. Still, I'm getting ahead of myself. We could talk about all that later. There's more you should know about Grandma and the shop. More importantly, the shop's familiar, Salem. He's a gray cat with a bad attitude and a long memory. Nobody told me his full story, but people like to talk. And over time, I've heard enough to piece some of it together. The rumor is that he used to be a wizard. He was the arrogant, powerful type who thought rules didn't apply to him. At some point, he pissed off an all-powerful enchantress, and she turned him into a cat for the next 1,000 years. No one knows how long ago that was. When I asked Grandma once, she just said, "He's not halfway through yet." Salem doesn't like talking, but he'll get his point across some other way. He'll knock over jars if you forget to feed him. He'll disappear for hours when you need him most and show up later looking smug about it. He likes to sit on the highest shelf in the back room where the herbs are stored just out of reach. Grandma named him Salem as a joke, which he clearly didn't find funny. I only found out later she was talking about the black cat from that old witch sitcom from the 90s. The shop itself is called Hazel's Marketing Goods. It sits on the corner of 137th and Malcolm X, right between a barber shop and a storefront church. Looks like any other Harlem bodega. Dusty produce crates out front, neon open sign in the windows, bell that rings when the door swings too wide. You can buy soap, cereal, canned vegetables, frozen waffles, paper towels, batteries, toothpaste, the usual stuff. But that's just during the day. After 8 p.m., we close the front and open the back. Not to the alley, but to a different part of the building. There's a bookshelf in the office. Grandma keeps her favorite book on it. An old, battered hard copy of Frankenstein on the spine. If you pull it out and turn it just right, the back panel opens and leads to a narrow hallway. At the end of that hallway is the night shop. That's where things change. The walls are lined with wooden shelves. The floor is stone. The ceiling hangs low and warm, and the air smells like cinnamon, smoke, and copper. Every jar is labeled, even the ones containing eyeballs. Every candle is handmade. There are roots wrapped in cloth, powders in sealed tins, bones tied with string, and bundles of herbs that don't grow anywhere I've ever studied. There are oils that shimmer like motor fluid, and little red flannel bags sewn shut with black thread. Grandma's shop serves Harlem's supernatural crowd, the ones that live tucked between the cracks. Old southern bloodlines that go back generations. Werewolves with tired eyes and careful manners. Witches from Louisiana with mud still under their nails. River spirits who drag muck all over the floor but still have the audacity to barter. Every so often, a boo hag comes through, looking for coffee beans and gluten-free bread. Sirens from the Hudson Valley pass through on their way south, always asking for salt and tobacco. You get the idea. Most of what I do involves stocking shelves and labeling jars. I wipe down the counter every night and restock the candles when we run low. When Grandma's knees don't hurt, she lets me help her brew things I can hardly stand the smell of. And through it all, Salem watches. I've been working here close to 6 months now, and trust me, I have stories that'll keep curious people like you up all night. So go on, pull up a chair. Pour yourself some of Grandma's famous carrot tea, if you can handle the kick. We have time. Let me tell you how it all started. My very first day in the shop. I remember it like it was yesterday. Grandma picked me up from the train station herself. I offered to grab a cab, but she said no one with sense paid money to get lost that deep in Harlem. And besides, she had errands to run. She pulled up in an old blue Buick that rumbled like it'd been hexed into staying alive. When I opened the door, there was a full sack of yams in the front seat. She told me to hold it on my lap and not ask questions. That was my first job, I guess. Yam security. We rode in silence for a while. Then she asked if I was hungry. I said I'd eaten on the train, which was true, but it didn't stop her from handing me a brown paper bag with 2 hot rolls and a square of cornbread wrapped in foil. I didn't say no. You don't turn down Grandma's food. Not if you know what's good for you. When we got to the corner of 137th and Malcolm X, she pulled into a spot like it belonged to her. Probably did. The shop looked just like I remembered from when I was a kid. Narrow red awning, windows taped with paper signs, old handwritten hours. 2 milk crates were holding up a display of overripe tomatoes. Well, this is it. Hazel's Market. Been mine since before you had teeth, she said. Inside, it smelled like floor wax and black paper. The place was tight, with rows of narrow shelves packed full of groceries. Most of it was regular stuff: bread, rice, cereal, cleaning supplies, canned goods. A few shelves leaned to one side, but none had fallen yet. A little bell jingled when we came in, and the air felt warmer somehow. She gave me a tour like it was any old job. First, the basics. Register in the front, broom in the back, break table next to the ice machine, even though she didn't like people sitting down on the clock. I was to keep the shelves neat, sweep before closing, and never move the jar by the window. When I asked why, she just said, "It's got a job to do, same as you." Then she walked me to the back row and pointed to the last shelf on the left. Looked normal, stacked with paper towels and bags of rice. "This one's not like the others. She's called Helen. If you treat her right, she'll restock herself," Grandma said, tapping the side of the shelf with the back of her hand. I stared at her. "You named your shelf." "She named herself. Now go on, be polite." I looked at the shelf, then back at Grandma. She didn't blink. So I sighed, leaned in a little, and said, You're looking real solid today, Helen. Straight lines, good wood grain. I'm real proud of you. A box of rice slid into place on the bottom row, like it'd been there the whole time. I rubbed my eyes, like I was seeing things but didn't say anything else. Grandma just gave me that little smug smile of hers that her and Dad have in common before turning down the next aisle. Next, she brought me into the office. The desk was stacked with loose papers, a cash box, and 3 ceramic frogs that stared straight ahead like they were listening. On the far wall stood an old bookshelf, packed with cookbooks, gardening guides, and what looked like one very out-of-place sci-fi novel. It took me a second to realize that it was a battered edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She walked straight up to it and pulled it off the top shelf. The whole bookshelf slid open like a door. "Come on, let me show you the rest," she said. I followed her into a hallway just wide enough for one person at a time. It opened up into a room that didn't make sense size-wise. From the outside, this should have been a closet, but the inside went deep. Long shelves, stone walls, soft light from glass lanterns hanging overhead. It looked more like a root cellar than part of a Harlem bodega. "This is where the work happens. During the day, we feed people. At night, we help them with something a little more special," she said. I stood there for a second, just trying to take it all in. There were labeled jars, cloth-wrapped bundles, candles, and tiny bags pinned up like museum pieces. The whole place smelled like cinnamon and dried herbs. Not the kind you find in plastic shakers, either. Real ones, picked by hand. "I don't expect you to understand all this right away. Your daddy never took to it. Black thumb, that one. Good man, but magic slid off him like rain off a slick coat. But you might have something. That blood didn't skip every generation," she said as she looked me over. I told her I wasn't looking to become a root worker. I was just here to help her out, run errands whenever she needed. She smiled, like that was enough for now. Good. Well, we'll see where it goes," she said. And that's when I met Salem. He walked in from the hallway like he owned the place. Sleek gray fur, high tail, eyes half closed like he was already tired of me. I bent down to greet him and got one sharp swipe across the toe of my sneaker. No claws, just a warning. Grandma looked over. "Oh, that means he likes you. He doesn't bother with people he don't plan on seeing again." I didn't really believe her. I kept my distance just the same. The rest of the night moved quick. A werewolf came in first, still half buttoned into a work shirt, asking if we had any more of the cedar and clove shampoo. Said his usual spot ran out, and the store brand stuff made his coat dull. Grandma handed him a dark bottle from a shelf I hadn't noticed before. No label on it, just a wax seal and a faint pine scent. He paid in exact change and promised to send his cousin by next week. Not long after, a vampire walked in wearing sunglasses and a wool coat like it was still winter. He asked if his order was ready. 2 jars of blood replacement, one warm, one cold. Grandma brought them out from under the counter and placed them gently in a padded box. He nodded his thanks, slipped her a folded bill, and left without a word. Later, a fellow witch stopped by. She and Grandma hugged like old neighbors and caught up in short, quiet phrases. She handed over a neat bundle of cinnamon sticks tied with blue thread. In return, Grandma gave her a small, cloudy jar filled with what looked like pickled eyeballs. Some open, some not. Neither of them blinked. They just traded, nodded, and the woman walked out humming to herself. I stood off to the side, trying not to stare. Grandma didn't explain a single thing. She just moved through it all like this was the most natural job in the world. I didn't understand half of what I saw, but I knew enough to stay out of the way and keep the counter clean. By the time we closed up, I realized I hadn't looked at my phone once. Wasn't what I expected. Wasn't anything like what I'd pictured. But I went to bed that night thinking maybe I'd stumbled onto something better. Maybe it was something I could get good at. Even if the cat hated me. I was sure Salem would warm up to me eventually. Maybe. Getting used to the routine of running the shop came easy, but I couldn't shake something off my mind. Like, why'd she take so long to come get me and explain it all? Grandma didn't bring it up right away. Weeks passed before she sat me down in the conjure room. It was late. The store was closed, the front lights off, and the back room smelled like cinnamon, bay leaf, and something warm I couldn't name. She had a kettle on, and the air carried steam from carrot tea and the soft sound of jars clinking when she moved things around. That night, she pulled up a stool, handed me a mug, and said it was time I learned about root work. Real root work. "This isn't wizard magic," she began. "This ain't no fireball in one hand and lightning in the other." "No arson, got it," I said. She smacked me for that. She went on. She said root work, hoodoo, conjure, call it what you like, was magic for the people. It was born out of necessity and survival through the darkest times. It's everyday magic, household magic, dust and bones to create tonics to heal the sick, salt laid in the corners to keep out the ghouls, red brick ground up under the window frame, things to keep you safe, to keep your people safe. That's what this is." She moved around the room as she talked. Her hands passed over jars filled with powders and oils, and eyeballs that moved. She pointed out the difference between hot devil's powder and bone dust, showed me where she kept the graveyard dirt, let me smell 2 different jars of pixie dust, and asked which one felt stronger. I didn't know how to answer, but she said my guess was right anyway. This kind of work helped folks through the worst of times, the kind of poor where there's no soup left in the pot, the kind of sickness where there's no doctor coming. We made do with what we had, and we kept each other whole," she said, as she passed me a jar labeled frog toes. She said her own mother taught her, back when they lived in the Low Country, before they moved north. Said every woman in the line carried some piece of the knowledge, even if they didn't want it, even if it scared them. Grandma wasn't afraid. She learned everything she could. "I tried to teach your daddy once, he didn't take to it. Not that he wasn't smart, he just didn't have the right hands for it," she said. I leaned forward, turning the mug in my hands. Why didn't she ever teach me any of this growing up? Not even a little? Because it wasn't my call. Your daddy asked me not to. Said he wanted to raise you clean. Said you'd already been through enough losing your mama, and he didn't want you getting caught up. And I honored it, even though it hurt me. I kept you out of the shop. I thought maybe one day he'd change his mind. My brow furrowed. Dad asked you not to. Your daddy loved your mama something fierce. When she passed, something in him folded up, like he couldn't unbend no matter how long I waited. He meant well, Sonny, but he was grieving for a long time. And grief, well, it makes people turn away from what used to give them comfort, she explained. I looked at the table between us. There was a bowl of roots soaking in water, Their edges had gone soft. The water smelled like soil and iron. "But you're here now, and we've got time to catch up. You may not have come up with it, but that don't mean it can't live in you," she said with a smile. I smiled back. She stood again, moved toward a small box on the shelf, and brought out a folded cloth with something wrapped inside. When she opened it, I saw a small bundle tied with string, filled with what looked like dirt, bone, and dried herbs. "This is a starter hand for protection. Don't ask it for anything fancy now, just carry it. Keep it close. You'll know when you need it." I took it without asking questions. The cloth felt warm, like it'd been sitting in the sun, even though the room was cool. "You don't have to be a root worker," she began, "but you need to understand where you come from. This isn't just magic. This is blood and legacy. Your dad knew it. I know it. You ought to know it too." The room was quiet for a while after that, and the smell of steeped roots and the sound of the kettle boiling filled the room. For the first time, I understood why my dad kept me away. Grandma had given me space to come back on my own terms, and somehow, without even meaning to, I had. I didn't know what all this would mean yet, what I was supposed to do with root magic or legacy or any of it. But I didn't feel lost. At least not there in that room with Grandma. It felt like the ground had finally settled under me. And for someone like me, it was a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Grandma's lesson stayed with me for the next few days. I kept the little protection bundle she gave me in the inner pocket of my jacket and found myself checking it without thinking. It didn't glow or pulse or do anything special. It just sat there with a sort of weight. It was comforting. The place fell back into its usual rhythm after that. Regulars came and went. The front stayed calm, the back stayed busy, and Grandma drifted in and out like someone who operated on a schedule only she understood. She said she had to commune with the spirits, and the way she said it made it clear she didn't expect me to ask follow-up questions. She packed a thermos, a bag of dried herbs, and one of her heavier shawls, and then she slipped out the back door. Sometimes she was gone for hours, sometimes days. This time it was the latter. The third morning, she still hadn't returned, and I was halfway through sorting a crate of plantains when someone stepped into the shop who looked, for lack of a better word, like shit. The man introduced himself as Luther. He was tall and broad, his clothes were worn, and his jeans scuffed and frayed at the edges. He stood near the counter with both hands tucked into his jacket pockets, like he was trying not to touch anything, till he was sure he was allowed. His eyes kept drifting toward the back hallway, as if he expected Grandma to appear any minute. When I told him she wasn't here, and that I couldn't be sure when she'd be back, something in him tightened. He shifted his weight and looked around the store again, as though trying to decide whether he should stay or leave. He stayed. He explained why he'd come. He said he worked at a construction site on the far side of Harlem and had taken a cheap apartment nearby to save money on subway fare. He didn't try to sell it as anything more than it was. A bad building in a rough area with a rent price low enough to raise suspicion. He said he'd taken it anyway because the commute had been wearing him down, and he wanted a place close enough to walk. The trouble started after he moved in. Small things at first. Things a tired man might overlook, but they grew. The first issue was the smell. He said the apartment smelled like blood on Wednesdays only, no other day. No matter how much he scrubbed, no matter how often he aired the place out, it sat under the walls and floors like something no one had properly cleaned up. And then all the light bulbs broke. Not at once, one at a time, until the entire apartment went dark. He replaced them, but they kept breaking, and now he lived by candlelight. The last problem was the one he couldn't ignore. He said he'd been waking up with dirt on his chest every morning, and not just a little, enough to coat his sheets, enough to leave a trail on the floor when he stood up. His nails were cracked and packed with soil he didn't remember touching. Some mornings he found dried blood at the edges of his cuticles, as if he'd clawed at something rough for hours. His shoes were scuffed to the leather. His jeans had dirt ground deep into the seams. He tried to explain it away at first. Maybe he'd scratched the floor in his sleep. Maybe the dirt tracked in from the hallway. What finally broke him was the news. A string of graves had been disturbed at a cemetery a few blocks from his building. Not vandalized, opened, dug up with bare hands and no footprints around him. The evening broadcast showed photos of the damaged plots, and he felt sick to his stomach. He woke up the next day with blood under his nails again, and felt exhausted down to the bone, like he'd worked a full shift in his sleep. He didn't know what any of it meant, but he knew it wasn't right. And when he told this story at the bar where he stopped after work, the bartender told him to go talk to the witch. That was how he ended up standing in front of me, waiting for someone to tell him whether he was imagining things, or if something was genuinely wrong with him or his home. I stood behind the counter, tried to decide what I was supposed to do. Grandma wasn't here. She hadn't given me instructions for situations like this. But Luther kept standing there with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders drawn tight, like a man holding his breath. And after a few moments, it felt like the only answer was the simple one. I told him I could come take a look. I went to the back room and packed a small tote bag with the items Grandma always used for simple protection cases. A candle, a bag of salt, a charm made from dried herbs and thread. A small jar of cleansing mix she kept pre-made on the highest shelf. I didn't know whether any of it would help, but I recognized them from watching her work, and they made sense to bring. When I set the bag on the floor to add a few more items, Salem climbed inside without hesitation. He circled once and settled himself in like this was a routine he'd been waiting for. He didn't look at me for permission. He never did. I figured if the shop familiar wanted to come along, might be better to let him. I checked the tote once more, adjusted the strap, and told Luther I was ready. He nodded. He didn't seem reassured, but he didn't seem alone anymore either. Sometimes that's the best someone can ask for. We stepped out onto the sidewalk with the tote over my shoulder, Salem's ears just barely visible from inside the bag, and the evening settling in across Harlem like another layer of the city waking up. I locked the front door, checked it twice, and reminded myself that this was part of the job now. Root workers made house calls. Witches did too. And if I was going to help Grandma run this place one day, I needed to learn how to walk into trouble instead of around it. I didn't know what we would find in Luther's apartment, but I sent a quick prayer to whoever was listening, knowing we'd need all the help we could get. Luther led the way through a few side streets until we reached his building. The entrance had peeling paint and a broken buzzer. The hallways were narrow and dim, and the whole place smelled like boiled cabbage the moment we stepped in. It wasn't subtle. The scent clung to the walls and floors and floated down the hallway in a steady wave. Made my stomach turn, but I tried to keep a straight face as we climbed up to the third floor. I learned enough from Grandma to know that smells mattered. Certain ones showed up in old magic, especially the kind used to hide work someone didn't want found. Boiled cabbage was common in Eastern European folklore. It was used to mask the presence of a spell. I'd read that in one of Grandma's books the week before, and now it clicked in a way that felt too on the nose to ignore. Luther unlocked the door to his apartment, and the smell got worse. Salem jumped out of the tote bag as soon as we stepped inside and began walking the perimeter. The apartment itself was small. 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, and a living room with a sagging couch. The floorboards were worn down in patches. A candle sat on every flat surface. Luther hadn't exaggerated. Every light bulb really was gone. I walked through the rooms and tried not to think about how unqualified I felt. I wasn't Grandma. I didn't have decades of practice. I only had what she'd shown me and what I remembered from watching her work. Still, I was here now, and Luther was watching me with a look that expected something useful. I started with the basics. I checked the corners of the rooms for unusual powders or markings. I checked the door frame for symbols or scratches. I checked under the mattress for anything that didn't belong. The candlelight made it easy to see the small things. A few piles of dirt on the sheets confirmed what Luther had said. His shoes by the doors were still covered in mud. His jacket sleeves were frayed, like he'd been digging through rough ground. Salem circled the living room twice before pausing near the kitchen. His ears flicked once. His tail twitched. Then he walked toward the refrigerator and sat down in front of it, like he'd found what we were looking for. I took that as my cue. I moved into the kitchen and pulled the refrigerator forward. It scraped across the floor with a long grinding sound. Behind it, the wall didn't sit flush. There was a narrow panel with a small gap at the bottom, just wide enough for a hand to slip through. The boiled cabbage smell was coming from there, stronger than anywhere else. When I pulled the panel free, a small crawl space revealed itself. Big enough for a few objects, not big enough for a person. Salem backed up, his fur raised slightly. Inside the crawl space was a bundle wrapped in cloth. The fabric was stained and tied with something that looked like old twine. I didn't touch it right away. Instead, I studied it the way Grandma always did when someone brought her something strange. The cloth looked handmade. The twine wasn't twine at all, but horsehair, braided tightly. The smell of boiled cabbage came from inside that bundle. It was a concealment trick. Someone had placed this here intentionally. It wasn't an accident, and it didn't belong to Luther. I took the bundle out and placed it on the kitchen table. Then I untied it carefully. Inside were bone fragments, herbs I didn't recognize, a stone covered in red dust, and a piece of cloth that looked like it'd been torn from someone's clothing, all wrapped together in a way that spoke of a deliberate hand. It was a voodoo artifact. Old, tense, the kind used to direct fear or sickness towards someone without even touching them. Grandma kept items like this locked away at the back of the conjure room. She said they were nothing to play with. I unpacked the tote bag and set out the items I'd brought. The candle for clearing, the salt for boundaries, the protection charm for the room, the jar of cleansing mix for the corners. I worked slowly, the same way I'd seen Grandma do it. Salt across the threshold first, then the corners, then the windowsills, then the candle in the center of the living room. I lit it and watched the flame catch. I repeated the process through every room, making sure the salt line stayed unbroken. Salem inspected every spot after I finished it, which I took as approval. When the work was done, the apartment felt different. Not lighter exactly, but calmer. The boiled cabbage smell didn't vanish, but it faded enough to make the place feel like a real home instead of something under a spell. Luther thanked me. There was something in the change of his expression that caught my eye. It looked like he believed he'd finally be able to sleep. Grandma returned to the shop 3 days later. She listened to everything I told her about the apartment and the crawl space. She examined the bundle I'd wrapped up and brought back. She didn't touch it with her bare hands. She said Luther must have upset someone connected to old magic. Maybe an ex-wife with the wrong kind of ties. Maybe a boss with family roots he didn't talk about. Someone with access to his place and a grudge deep enough to do this kind of thing. They planted the artifact, and the apartment did the rest. She called it a boneyard curse, an old spell meant to drive a person toward the grave one night at a time. Left alone long enough, it would have pulled Luther toward the place he kept waking up covered in dirt from. A person doesn't survive that kind of end. They go willingly, because the curse tells them to. If I hadn't made the house call, Grandma said he would have buried himself alive within weeks. But Luther was safe now. The curse was broken. The apartment was clean. Whoever had planted the artifact hadn't shown themselves, and that part of the mystery would remain unsolved to this day. Things settled down after the Luther case, at least by Harlem standards. The shop kept its usual rhythm, and Grandma slipped back into her routines like she'd never been gone. I kept helping customers, stocking shelves, learning names, and figuring out which jars I wasn't supposed to touch unless she told me to. The familiar regulars still stopped by, Betty with her bags of gossip and clumsy elbows, Jack with his cigarette smoke and soft voice, and the rest of the neighborhood's supernatural crowd who treated the shop like a second home. I stayed. Wasn't a decision I made all at once. It just happened in the way slow decisions do. The kind you realize only after they've already become true. Some mornings, I would catch sight of my degree hanging on the back wall of my room and feel that itch, like I should be doing something more official, more, career-shaped. But that itch got smaller every day. Harlem had its own kind of work waiting for me. Real work. Work that people needed. Grandma still called most of the shots, but every now and then she gave me a job that carried more weight. A cleansing, a blessing, a reading. Nothing big, nothing too dangerous, but enough to show she trusted me to take steps in the same direction she'd walked her whole life. I didn't call myself a root worker, and she didn't call me one either. She said the title wasn't important. The responsibility was. I could see myself staying here for a long time. Maybe longer than I expected. There's something about this neighborhood that keeps you in place. Not trapped, exactly, and just anchored. And once you start paying attention, you realize how many stories sit under the sidewalks and fire escapes. Monsters buying groceries. Witches trading recipes. Spirits trying to pay off old debts. It's a strange corner of the world, but it feels honest in a way my old life never did. So that's all I've got for now. Those are the stories I can tell without Grandma fussing at me for sharing too much. If you've listened this far, well, thank you. I'll have more eventually. Harlem always provides. Oh, and if you ever need anything, bread, beans, coffee, or maybe a solution to a problem you can't say out loud to anyone else, you know where to find us. Until then, be careful out there.
Hey, huge thank you to all my patrons. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, there's a link in the description. I hope you enjoyed the story, and have a good night.
My name is Daniel. I drive for Uber in Oakland. I used to study engineering at Cal State East Bay. I liked statics and load calculations. I liked knowing how much a beam could hold before it failed. If something cracked, there was a reason. If a structure leaned, you could measure why. There was comfort in that. Driving nights in Oakland, well, it doesn't work like that. I usually log in around 8 p.m. and I stay out until 4 or 5 in the morning. The money's better after dark. Surge pricing hits around the bars near Lake Merritt. Airport runs stack up near Hagenberger Road. Late night hospital pickups come in from Summit and Highland. If you know when to position yourself near International Boulevard or Broadway, you can make enough to cover rent and chip away at loans. But nights also mean you see everything. I've been punched once on International near 42nd. A guy got in already angry, said it took too long even though I was there in 3 minutes. He swung before I could say anything. Split my lip on the steering wheel. I finished the ride anyway. Someone tried to yank my door open at a red light near 73rd Avenue. I had it locked. He banged on the window with something metal and ran when traffic moved. A woman's boyfriend leaned through my driver's side window outside a liquor store near Fruitvale Bart and told me if I drove off without her, he'd follow me home. I waited. She got in. He didn't follow. One night outside Eastmont Mall, a kid no older than 16 grabbed for my phone mount while I was stopped. I shoved him back and drove off before he got a grip. It happens. You work anyway. Oakland at night is specific. International Boulevard smells like exhaust and fryer grease. Lake Merritt reflects red and blue police lights across the water after midnight. The stretch of 98th Avenue near the Coliseum turns empty after 1:30 a.m., except for warehouse workers and the occasional car creeping too slow. Drivers talk. Not officially. Just small comments while you're waiting in the airport queue or parked near a 24-hour gas station. Don't idle in alleys off Eads Avenue. Don't accept pickup points that land inside fenced industrial lots near the Port of Oakland. Don't circle Lake Merritt after midnight if the route loops twice. And if you're near 98th and you see trash piled near the curb at 2 in the morning, cancel the ride. Most of it sounds like paranoia or superstition. Drivers work alone too long and start inventing patterns. I didn't pay attention at first. If a pin showed up, I drove to it. If it paid surge, I kept it. Bills don't care about rumors. My coverage area is mostly East Oakland and the lower hills. I take rides from West Oakland BART down to San Leandro Street. I've driven up Joaquin Miller Road more times than I can count. I've waited outside the Port of Oakland gates hoping for a decent freight working tip. I've done airport runs from Hagenberger at 3 in the morning when the roads are empty and the Bay Bridge glows in the distance. You learn how to scan people real fast. Shoes, hands, eyes in the rearview mirror. You notice who sits too close, who breathes too heavy, who won't stop staring at the back of your head. I installed a dash cam after my second week. Interior and exterior. Not because of ghosts, because of people. The first time something didn't make sense, I assumed I was tired. Long shifts will do that. When you drive 12 hours straight, the city starts to flatten. Streetlights blur. You replay the same blocks over and over. Mandela Parkway looks the same at 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. The port cranes look like metal skeletons against the sky. The water near Jack London Square sits black and still. There are normal dangers here. Robberies, fights, drunk passengers who throw up and argue about cleaning fees, and that part I understand. You can measure that risk. You can calculate it. The other things don't fit into numbers. The first rule I broke was on 98th Avenue. It was 1:47 in the morning. I was idling near Hagenberger Road after an airport drop-off when a surge ping popped up. Pickup location: an alley off Eads Avenue, behind a row of auto body shops. Good fare. Close by. I accepted it. And that's when I learned why drivers don't stop near trash after 1:30 a.m. Case 1. The 98th Avenue rule. The pickup ping came through at 1:47 a.m. while I was stopped near the Chevron on Hegenberger Road. It was a short ride request with a decent surge attached. The pickup location sat just off 98th Avenue, down a narrow alley behind a row of auto body shops near Eads. I remember thinking it was easy money. The alley wasn't well lit. One wall was corrugated metal. The other was cinder block stained dark near the base from years of runoff. 3 large green trash bins sat against the wall halfway down. A pile of black garbage bags was stacked beside them. No movement. No people waiting with phones out. I pulled forward slightly and stopped near the pickup pin. I put the car in park and turned on my hazards. The app showed the rider's name, but I didn't recognize it. No profile photo. I waited. 30 seconds passed, then 60. The alley was quiet except for the hum of my engine and a faint electrical buzz from a broken light fixture above one of the shop doors. The trash bag sat still. At 90 seconds, I leaned forward to check the map again, and that's when one of the garbage bags shifted. It wasn't wind, the air was still. The bag twitched from the inside, then settled. I stared at it for a few seconds, expecting a raccoon to burst out. Oakland's got plenty of those. The bag moved again. Slower this time, like something inside it was adjusting its position. I reached to cancel a ride, and before I could press the button, the lid of the nearest green trash bin lifted halfway up. Not fast. It rose steadily, like someone inside was pushing it with both hands. And then something stood up behind it. At first I thought it was someone wearing a costume. It was bright green, rounded at the shoulders. The surface looked soft, almost foam-like. Its head was large and oval-shaped with 2 wide, circular eyes that reflected my headlights without blinking. It straightened fully, clearing the top of the trash bin. The skin along its side had split at the seam near the ribs, and through the opening, I saw darker tissue underneath. Not fabric or stuffing, something wet. A second shape rose from the pile of garbage bags. This one unfolded awkwardly, pushing plastic aside as it stood. It had the same bright green surface, same wide mouth stretched too far across its face. When it opened that mouth, I saw rows of small, narrow teeth packed tightly together. They didn't rush me right away. The first one waddled forward 2 steps. Its legs moved stiff at the hips, then loosened. It adjusted to the pavement like it was getting used to standing upright. And then it sprinted. It covered the distance between the trash bins and my rear bumper in, less than 2 seconds. The impact hit the trunk hard enough to shake the steering wheel in my hands. My rear camera flashed white for half a second, then went to static before returning to a distorted view. The second one ran toward the passenger side. It slammed both hands against the rear window, its face pressed flat against the glass. The green surface stretched thin around its teeth. I could see the seam splitting wider near its cheek. The plastic-looking eyes didn't blink. They just stared directly through the glass at me. Well, I shifted into drive and I hit the gas. The tires spun for a moment on loose gravel before catching. The first creature slid off the trunk, and I heard something scrape across the metal as I accelerated. I didn't look back until I hit the end of the alley. I blew through the stop sign at 98th and I turned onto Hegenberger without even slowing. My hands were tight on the wheel. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my neck. I drove 3 blocks before checking the rear view. The alley was empty. Nobody was chasing the car, no green shapes in the road, no movement at all. I kept driving until I reached the I-880 on-ramp. I pulled onto the shoulder just before merging and I put the car in park. I stepped out. The trunk had a shallow dent just left of center. Not deep, but visible even in low light. There was a smear across the paint. Thick, dark green. It wasn't paint transfer. It had texture. Small, fibrous strands ran through it. And the smell hit me when I leaned closer. Bleach mixed with spoiled vegetables, like a dumpster behind a grocery store in summer. I wiped some of it with a napkin from my glove box. The residue stuck to the paper and left a streak across the clear coat. And I got back in my car and I drove home. The next morning, in full daylight, the dent was still there. The green smear had dried and hardened along the edge. I tried to scrub it off at a self-serve wash on International Boulevard. It lightened, but it didn't disappear completely. There were faint scratch marks near the trunk latch, 4 thin lines spaced evenly apart. Claw marks. I checked the ride history in the app. The pickup was marked "Canceled by driver." The rider's name had disappeared. The pickup location no longer showed the alley behind the body shops. It now sat at the front curb on 98th. I drove back that afternoon. The alley looked normal. Trash bins upright, garbage bags stacked neatly. No damage, no dents in the bins, no green residue on the pavement. I stood there for a minute, staring at the same spot where the first one had stood up. A man from one of the shops stepped outside to smoke and asked if I needed something. I told him no and left. After that night, I stopped accepting any pickup where the pin landed inside an alley. If the dot sits behind a building instead of on the street, I cancel it immediately. And I don't stop next to open trash piles on 98th Avenue after 1:30 in the morning. I don't care how high the surge is. Case 2. The Lake Merritt Loop. The pickup came in at 12:32 a.m. on a Thursday. I just dropped off 2 kids near Grand Avenue and was idling along Lakeside Drive, facing the water. The lake was flat and dark, broken only by streaks of yellow and white from the apartment buildings across the way. A light wind pushed small ripples toward the concrete edge. A few people were still out walking, but most of the park had emptied. The request popped up less than a block away. Pickup location, Lakeside Drive near the pergola. Rider name, Linda. No profile photo. I accepted it, and I pulled forward under the street lamp. The pergola sat just off the path, white columns glowing faintly under park lighting. A few benches lined the walkway. Nobody stood directly under the lamp. And then I saw her walking up from the grass. She wasn't running or waving. She just walked straight toward the car, like she already knew which one was mine. She was barefoot. Her hair was dark and wet, hanging in thin strands against her cheeks and neck. Wasn't damp like sweat. It looked soaked. Her dress clung tightly to her legs and waist. No jacket, no purse, no shoes in her hands. She opened the rear passenger door and slid in. The seat cushion made a soft sound under her weight. "Daniel?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "You're Linda?" She nodded. The destination on the app read Grand Lake Theater. Easy ride. Around the lake, up Grand Avenue, 2 turns and done. I pulled away from the curb and merged onto Lakeside Drive. The navigation arrow traced the edge of the water in a smooth curve. I checked the rearview mirror. She sat upright, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her eyes weren't on me. She stared out the window at the water sliding past. I saw her hair dripping occasionally onto the seat. I heard it. A faint tap when droplets hit vinyl. "Long night?" I asked. She didn't answer. I figured she'd had a few drinks and didn't want to talk. That wasn't unusual. As I passed the intersection near Bellevue Avenue, the navigation screen flickered. The blue arrow marking my car froze in place, even though I was still moving. The rest of the map continued scrolling forward, but the route line disappeared. The destination box at the top of the screen went blank. No address, no turn instructions, just a spinning circle. I checked my signal bars, full service. I tapped the screen twice, nothing changed. Huh, app's acting weird, I said, half to myself. No response from the back seat. I glanced up at the mirror, and the seat was empty. I hit the brakes hard enough that my seatbelt locked against my chest. The car behind me swerved around and laid on the horn. I steered toward the curb near a patch of grass and turned on my hazards. I twisted around fully in my seat. The back door was closed. The seatbelt strap hung loose, still slightly angled, as if someone had just unbuckled it. The fabric of the seat was darker where she'd been sitting. I reached back and pressed my hand against it. Wet. Not soaked, but clearly damp. I stepped out of the car and checked both sides. No door closing sound, no footsteps on pavement, no splash from the water. The walkway behind me was empty, except for a couple walking a dog about 50 yards away. The lake itself looked undisturbed. I got back in and I stared at the app. The ride was still active. The timer continued counting upward. The destination field remained blank, no reroute, no cancellation notice. I tapped End Ride. The screen froze for several seconds, and then the ride completed automatically. 1 star appeared immediately. No message, no delay, just the rating. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, hazards blinking. The back seat smelled faintly like lake water, not chlorine or sewage, just that specific smell of algae and concrete that hangs near the edge of Lake Merritt in summer. I drove the rest of the night distracted. Every time I looked in the mirror, I expected to see her again. Well, the next 2 days passed without incident. Normal rides, fairly normal people. A hospital nurse from Summit. A bartender heading home near Jack London Square. A couple arguing quietly in Spanish on International. On Saturday night, I got home around 3:30 a.m. and turned on the TV while heating leftovers. KTVU was running a late-night segment about local cold cases. The anchor introduced a story about a woman who had drowned in Lake Merritt 3 years earlier. They showed footage of divers entering the water near the pergola, yellow police tape strung between trees, candles arranged along the railing. Then they put her photo on screen, and I stopped moving. Dark hair, narrow jawline, small scar just above the left eyebrow. The exact same scar I'd noticed in the mirror when she turned slightly toward the streetlight. They switched to the driver's license photo. It was clearer. Same face, same slight asymmetry in the mouth, same thin nose, same eyes. I walked closer to the TV. The report said she'd left a bar near Grand Avenue just before midnight. Friends said she seemed fine, but she never made it home. Her body was recovered 2 days later from the lake. Cause of death: drowning. They displayed her full name: Linda Phillips. I muted the TV and I stood there for a long time. The back seat of my car still smelled faintly damp the next morning. I drove back to Lakeside Drive in daylight, and I parked nearby. Joggers passed. A couple pushed a stroller along the path. The lake looked harmless. I stared at the spot where she'd stepped into my car. There were no signs or markers, no memorial plaque, just concrete and water. Since that night, I don't complete full loops around Lake Merritt after midnight. If the route circles the water twice, I reroute manually through Grand Avenue, or I cut over toward Broadway. If a pickup pin lands too close to the pergola late at night, I let it expire. I have been mugged in this city. I've been punched in the face by a drunk stranger. I've had someone threaten to follow me home. Those are real dangers. You can see them coming. None of those people vanished without opening a door. And none of them left a 1-star rating after they were already dead. Case 3. The construction worker. The pickup came in at 5:10 a.m. on a Tuesday. That's the quiet hour. The bars are closed, the overnight hospital traffic slows down, the sky is still dark, but there's a gray line forming over the hills. Most of the rides at that time are airport runs or early shift workers. The request came from Mandela Parkway near West Grand Avenue. Rider name, Carlos. No profile photo. I accepted it, and I pulled up along the curb beside a stretch of industrial fencing. A row of shipping containers sat across the street. A semi-truck idled 2 blocks away. He was already standing there when I arrived. Hard hat in one hand, reflective vest over a long-sleeve shirt, work boots dusted white around the toes. He looked like he'd been up for hours. He opened the back door and got in.
"Morning,"
he said. "Hey, yeah, morning," I replied. "You headed to work?"
"Yeah, early shift,"
he replied. The app showed the destination as an address near the Port of Oakland, a chemical processing facility on the edge of the industrial zone, just off Middle Harbor Road. I'd driven that direction before, but I didn't remember that specific plant. He buckled his seatbelt carefully and rested his hard hat on his lap.
"You, drive nights?"
"Yeah, mostly," I replied. He nodded.
"That's rough. I used to do graveyard. Hard on the body."
His voice was steady, calm, friendly in a tired way. We merged onto West Grand and headed toward I-880. The freeway was nearly empty. A few headlights in the distance. The cranes at the port rose up like black shapes against the fading sky. "How long you been doing construction?" I asked.
"Long enough,"
he said with a small smile.
"Pays the bills."
He told me about early morning concrete pours, about how the air smells different near the water before sunrise, about how he liked getting work done before the city fully woke up. It felt normal, and that sticks with me. There was nothing wrong with him. No strange smell, no odd breathing, no strange pauses in conversation. Just a normal guy heading to work. As we exited the freeway and moved deeper into the industrial area, the roads grew narrower. Warehouses lined both sides. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. Security cameras mounted on poles. The address was about a mile ahead.
"So you ever get, weird riders at night?"
"Sometimes," I replied. "Drunk people, mostly." He nodded.
"Yeah, I bet."
There was a pause, and then he added,
"You know, it's always nice to talk to good people."
I glanced at him in the mirror. He was looking straight ahead, not at me. We turned onto the final road. The address was coming up on the right. Except there was no building. I slowed down. The app's blue arrow pointed directly to a stretch of cracked concrete behind a rusted chain-link fence. No facility, no lights, no structure at all. Just an empty lot covered in weeds and debris. I pulled to the curb and put the car in park. This doesn't look right. Is this address correct? I turned around, and the back seat was empty. The hard hat was gone. The seatbelt strap hung loose, still angled across the seat as if it had just been unlatched. I stepped out of the car. The fence had a sign bolted to it. Facility closed. Chemical accident. Unauthorized entry prohibited. Below that, smaller text listed the year. 6 years ago. The name of the plant was printed at the top, and it matched the destination in the app. I walked closer to the fence and looked inside. The concrete foundation was cracked and blackened in places. Metal beams lay twisted near the far end of the lot. Nothing stood taller than my waist. The app chimed softly. Ride complete. 5-star rating. A tip notification followed seconds later. I got back in my car, and I stared at the back seat. Dry. No dirt, no footprints, no water. I picked up my phone, and I searched the plant name, and the first result was a news article. Explosion at chemical facility near Port of Oakland. 8 workers killed. The article was dated 6 years earlier, and there was a group photo attached. Construction crew standing in front of the plant months before the accident. I zoomed in. Third man from the left. Hard hat tilted slightly back. Same dark hair. Same square jaw. Carlos. I sat there with the engine idling. Traffic began to pick up as the sky lightened. A delivery truck passed behind me. The driver didn't look twice. I checked the ride receipt in the app. Pick up, Mandela Parkway. Drop off, plant address. Time, 5:10 to 5:31 a.m. Rating, 5 stars. Tip, $8. No glitches or missing data. Everything documented cleanly. Well, I drove back toward the freeway slowly. Halfway up the on-ramp, I glanced in the rearview mirror again. Empty. I've had passengers disappear before. But this one thanked me. It's always nice to talk to good people, he said. The next time I drove past that stretch of road, I didn't look at the empty lot. I kept my eyes forward and I stayed in my lane. Some riders, they don't need a ride to get where they're going. I think they just need someone to talk to on the way. Case 4. The blood bank ride. The pickup came in at 1:18 a.m. on a Sunday. Location, International Boulevard near 14th Avenue. That stretch stays active late. Liquor stores with metal grates halfway down. A taco truck shutting off its burners. A bus idling at the stop with no passengers getting on. The streetlights throw yellow light over everything, and the pavement always looks wet even when it isn't. The rider's name was Victor. No profile photo. I pulled up in front of a closed discount store. The security gate was down. The sidewalk was mostly empty. He stepped out from behind the bus bench. He moved slowly, not injured or unsteady, just deliberate. He opened the rear passenger door and got in without hesitation. "Daniel?" he asked. "Yeah, that's me." He shut the door gently. And the smell hit me immediately. Rot. Not garbage rot or sour milk. It was heavier. And underneath it, it was almost like the scent of blood. Iron. The kind you taste when you bite the inside of your cheek. It filled the cabin in seconds. The destination in the app read Blood Source Donation Center on Broadway. Open 24 hours. I pulled back into traffic, and in the rearview mirror I got a clear look at him. His skin was pale in a way that didn't match the lighting. Not just light. It looked stretched tight across his cheekbones. His lips were thin and almost gray. His hair was combed straight back, dry and flat. He wasn't looking out the window or looking at the dashboard. He was staring directly at the back of my head. "So you, heading to donate?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled slowly. And I could see his teeth were small and evenly spaced. Very even and very clean. The grin didn't reach his eyes. We passed 19th Avenue, and the car felt smaller than usual. The smell of rot stayed steady. He leaned forward slightly, just an inch. The distance between his face and my headrest closed. In the mirror, he didn't blink. Not once. At the next red light near 23rd Avenue, I watched his reflection carefully. His chest wasn't rising. There was no visible breathing that I could see. Instead, the muscles in his throat pulsed once every few seconds, a slow contraction under the skin. He leaned closer again, another inch. I adjusted my seat forward slightly without making it obvious, and his grin widened. We drove in silence for another block, and I felt his eyes fixed on the back of my skull. The light ahead turned yellow, and I braked hard. Something slid off the dashboard and dropped into my lap. The silver necklace my grandfather gave me when I was a kid. Thin chain, small pendant, plain silver. I usually keep it resting near the base of the windshield, and it had shifted forward when I stopped. I picked it up without thinking. The metal felt cool in my hand. I lifted it, and I hooked it over the rearview mirror. The chain swung gently in front of the glass. In the mirror, his reaction was immediate. The grin vanished. His eyes shifted. Not to me, to the necklace. His body stiffened against the seat back. The smell of rot didn't disappear, but it seemed like it changed. It thinned. His jaw tightened.
"Let me out,"
he said. We were still 3 blocks from the blood bank, but I didn't argue. I unlocked the doors. He moved fast. The door opened before the car fully stopped rolling. He stepped out onto the sidewalk without looking back. The door shut firmly, and I checked the mirror. He was already halfway down the block, walking quickly toward a darker stretch of Broadway. I drove the remaining distance to the blood bank anyway. The building was lit up. A security guard stood inside the glass doors. 2 cars were parked in a lot. No one matching his description was walking toward it. The ride completed automatically in the app. No rating, no tip, no complaint. When I got home, I left the necklace hanging from the mirror, and I have not taken it down since. I don't know what he was. I only know that when he saw that silver necklace, he wanted out. Case 5. The Port of Oakland. This one happened at 2:54 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was parked near Jack London Square after dropping off a couple from Uptown when the request came in. Surge was high near the port. Pickup location sat inside the container yard off Middle Harbor Road. That's unusual. Most port workers meet rides outside the gate. I almost declined it, and then I saw the fare, and I accepted. Now the road toward the port is wide and mostly empty that time of night. The crane stands still over the water. Floodlights wash everything in hard white light. Stacks of containers rise like metal buildings on both sides. The app directed me to Gate 4. The guard booth light was on, but there was no guard inside. The gate arm lifted automatically as I approached. I didn't scan anything. It just went up. And maybe that should have been enough to turn around, but instead I drove through. The route took me down a narrow service lane between container stacks. My headlights reflected off red, blue, and gray steel walls on both sides. The pickup pin sat ahead near a red container. 3 trash bins were lined up against it. Green lids, one slightly tilted. I stopped 20 feet away. No worker or hard hat or movement. And then I smelled it. Bleach. Underneath it, spoiled vegetables. Sour and heavy, like produce left sealed in plastic too long. I remember the exact same smell from 98th Avenue. My stomach tightened. The rear camera flickered on without me shifting. The image shook for a second. The trunk alert lit up. Trunk open. I hadn't touched the release. In the rearview mirror, the back seat was empty. In the camera feed, the trunk lid was raised halfway.
and something green unfolded from inside. This one was big. Its surface was the same foam-like green texture. The seam along its side split wider as it stretched. Dark interior tissue showed through the tear. It braced itself against the trunk frame. The smell intensified. Bleach and rot filled the cabin. Its mouth opened sideways along the seam. Rows of small, tightly packed teeth flexed outward. The camera glitched white, and the trunk slammed shut. The dashboard still red, trunk open. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into drive and I hit the gas. The service lane ended at the exit gate. The gate arm was down, no guard, and I didn't slow. The bumper hit the gate hard enough to snap it free. The arm scraped across the windshield and flipped off to the side. I turned onto Middle Harbor Road and I accelerated toward I-880. In the rearview mirror, nothing followed. But the smell stayed. Bleach and rot. It filled the car like something was still inside. The trunk alert flickered twice and disappeared. I didn't slow until I was on the freeway heading north. 3 exits up, I pulled onto the shoulder near High Street. The smell faded slightly when I stopped. I stepped out and walked to the back of the car, and the trunk was open. Empty. Spare tire, jack, emergency kit. But there was a small section of green residue, and I could see claw marks. The lining smelled like cleaning chemicals and sour produce. The app showed rider unavailable, ride canceled. No rating, no profile, just gone. Case 6. The airport pickup. Now, this last story happened just after midnight at Oakland International. Now, airport rides are usually pretty simple. You sit in the designated queue, wait for the app to assign you, and you pull to the curb when the passenger walks out. Most of the time, it's business travelers with rolling suitcases, or college kids coming home for the weekend. This one was from Terminal 1. Rider name, William. No profile photo. I pulled into the pickup lane under the blue rideshare sign. Automatic doors slid open and shut behind a stream of passengers. A few people stood around checking their phones. A Southwest flight had just landed. He walked out alone. Early 20s, short dark hair, clean shaven, no luggage. He wore jeans and a black Def Leppard jacket. The logo across the back faded and cracked from age. He spotted my car and gave a small wave. "Hey, Daniel?" he asked as he opened the back door.
Yeah.
He slid into the seat and shut the door carefully. "Hey, I appreciate you picking me up this late." "No problem," I replied. "San Leandro, right?" "Yeah, near Washington Avenue." The address matched the one in the app. We pulled away from the curb and merged onto Hegenberger Road. The airport lights receded behind us. The road was mostly empty. "So you coming back home?" I asked. "Yeah, it's been a while," he said. He leaned back in the seat, looking out the window at the passing streetlights. "How's your flight?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "So how long you been driving?" "Oh, couple years," I began. "Mostly nights." "Yeah, it's good work, right?" His voice stayed calm, friendly. He asked if I liked it, and I told him it paid the bills, and he nodded like that made sense. We merged onto I-880 northbound. Traffic was light. The freeway hummed under the lights. The port crane stood dark against the sky to our right. He asked about my favorite late-night food spots in East Oakland. I told him about a taco stand near East 14th that stayed open late. He smiled. "Man," he said quietly, "I miss that." We exited towards San Leandro and followed the app's directions through a quiet neighborhood. Single-story houses, porch lights glowing softly, lawns cut short.
Hey, that's it, he said, pointing ahead. Blue house on the left. I slowed and pulled to the curb in front of a small house with a trimmed hedge and a narrow driveway. A street light cast a pale glow over the lawn. I shifted into park. Well, we're here, I said. No answer. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and the seat was empty. I turned around fully in my seat. The back door was closed. The seatbelt lay flat against the cushion. Nobody there. My heart kicked once, hard. I opened the driver's door and stepped out onto the street. The air felt cooler than before. I walked around to the back passenger seat and opened it. Empty. But something was lying across the seat. The black Def Leppard jacket. I reached in and picked it up. And it was hot. I dropped it instinctively, and I let it fall onto the pavement. As it hit the ground, I noticed holes burned through the fabric near the shoulder and low back. Not torn, burned. Edges blackened and stiff. I scratched the back of my head, trying to make sense of it. The front door of the blue house opened then. An older man stepped out. He wore jeans and a gray t-shirt. He looked at me calmly. "Everything all right?" he asked. Yeah, I said. And then I paused. I looked down at the jacket on the street. "Sir," I said, "you ever feel like you've seen a ghost?" He didn't laugh. He stepped off the porch and walked toward the curb. He bent down and picked up the jacket carefully. He looked at the back first, and his expression changed. He turned it over and checked the tag near the collar, and his fingers trembled slightly. My son used to have a jacket just like this." He looked closer at the name written inside the tag. William Price, Jr. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Neither did I. "He was 22, the old man began. "Plane crash. 23 years ago today. Flight out of Oakland." He kept staring at the name on the tag. I didn't know what to say. We talked briefly. The older man's name was William. After a minute or two, I got back into my car and I closed the door gently, and he kept his son's jacket. The ride in the app showed completed. 5-star rating. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked once more in the mirror. I think he just wanted to go home. Well, I don't drive nights anymore. I tried switching to daytime shifts for a few weeks. Airport runs in the morning, office commuters downtown, grocery store pickups in Alameda. Felt different with the sun out. City looked smaller. But it didn't change what had already happened. Every time somebody got in the back seat, I checked the mirror twice. Every time I smelled something out of place, my hands tightened on the wheel. Every time the app froze for half a second longer than usual, my stomach dropped. So I stopped. I sold the car to a guy in Hayward who didn't ask many questions, cleared what I owed on it, took a job that keeps me inside most days. I still drive sometimes, just not for strangers. I don't go near 98th Avenue at night. I don't circle Lake Merritt after dark. I don't take calls from the port, and I don't sit in airport queues past midnight. I keep the silver necklace hanging from the mirror in my new car. I don't leave it on the dashboard anymore. It stays up where I can see it. Some nights, when I'm stopped at a light, I still check the back seat out of habit. And it's always empty. But every now and then, when I pass a trash bin sitting too close to the curb, or when I drive by Lake Merritt and I see the water sitting flat under the streetlights, or when a plane flies low overhead on approach to Oakland International, I think about the rides I finished and the ones I didn't. I think about the construction worker who just wanted to talk before work. I think about the woman who never made it out of the lake.
I think about the thing that grinned in the mirror until silver swung between us. And I think about William Price Jr., 22 years old, 23 years gone. Oakland has real danger, real violence, real reasons to keep your doors locked. But sometimes the rider gets out before you stop. Sometimes the back seat empties without a sound. And sometimes, I think they're just trying to get back home. My name is Adam. I'm a consulting detective, which is a fancy way of saying people pay me to solve things they're too embarrassed to take to the cops. Missing husbands, dead cats in the mailbox, a smell coming from the neighbor's basement, that kind of thing. I run my office out of what used to be a failed Chinese joint down on Harmon Alley, behind a strip of laundromats in a donut shop that's always out of everything. There's no sign out front. If you don't already know where to look, you probably don't belong here. Inside, there are 2 desks. One is mine. It's solid oak, old, scarred with burns and knife marks, none of which are from me. The other belongs to Clive, my assistant, which is a generous term for someone who once tried to microwave a case file. The walls are a disaster. Peeling paint, water stains that look like South America. Newspaper clippings are thumbtacked into every inch of free space. Old missing posters, crime scene photos, scribbled notes that made sense once, but don't anymore. Even the bathroom's got sticky notes over the toilet tank. One of them says, "Don't trust the goblin with the orange shoes." I don't remember who wrote that. I do remember trusting a goblin with orange shoes, and I have a scar on my back to remind me of it. The kitchen's down the hall, or what used to be a kitchen, back when someone thought this place could pass health inspection. We turned it into a case file library. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Half of them are full of books. Clive says some are rare occult volumes. I think most are trashy horror novels with the covers ripped off. Either way, they collect dust the same. You'll find coffee mugs in every room. None of them clean. Some still have liquid in them. Some have life forms. Every once in a while, Clive tries to wash them. He never gets past 2 before something distracts him. Usually something stupid. Clive's a kid, early 20s. Eyes too wide, voice too loud. He's got this obsession with the occult. Thinks everything that goes bump in the night is the start of a real case. He's not wrong often enough to fire him, but he's not right often enough to trust unsupervised. He came here because he couldn't make it into the police academy. He says it was politics. I say it was his personality. Either way, he's mine now. I let him sit at the desk. I let him answer the phones. Sometimes I even let him talk to clients. Usually once. As for me, well, I've been doing this too long to believe in anything but evidence, rent, and caffeine. My name's not in the door. My face is not in the papers. But if you've got a problem nobody else can figure out, or nobody else wants to touch, well, you end up here. It was just another rainy day in Atlanta when the bell above the office door gave its half-hearted jingle. I didn't look up right away. Rain tends to bring in more leaks than leads. But then I caught a whiff of perfume that didn't belong to Clive or the mold in the walls. She stepped in like she didn't want to be seen doing it. Black dress, tight at the waist, cut just below the knees. Expensive. Same for the sunglasses, which she kept on, even though it was foggy enough outside to lose a Buick. Clive was halfway through pouring some stale coffee into his already stained mug. He stopped, blinking like someone had switched the channel on him. "Can I help you?" I asked, not moving from my desk. She hesitated, then took off her glasses. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes told the truth. Red around the edges, puffy. She'd been crying, just not today. Probably every day this week. "I heard you handle things," the woman said. "Well, that's one way to put it. Please, sit," I replied. She did. Crossed her legs like she'd been taught to do it. Clive hovered by the coffee machine. I gave him a look. He sat down and tried to look useful. "My name is Eve Monroe. My husband passed away 3 months ago. Military, Afghanistan. I was told I might be entitled to speak to someone with expertise," the woman said. "And what? Dead husbands or living problems?" She didn't blink. "Both." I leaned back in my chair, hands folded over my stomach. "Go on." She shifted in her seat. "Well, it started small. Lights flickering, remote going missing, things not working like they should. I thought it was just a house. It's old, probably built before half of Atlanta had running water. But then the lights on the second floor went out and never turned on again." She hesitated, eyes locked on the edge of the desk. "I think there's something in that house. Something evil. I think it's a demon." I ignored her last sentence and focused on something tangible. "Second floor lights?" I asked. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, all of them. Went out last month, but I just paid the electric bill. I called the city. They said it wasn't on their end. Hired an electrician. He said everything looked fine, like someone had deliberately killed the power up there." Clive cleared his throat. "That's real weird, all right." Eve didn't look at him. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small stack of glossy printouts. I started noticing words, spray painted. "In my house, always overnight," she said, laying the photos out one by one on my desk. I leaned forward. The photos weren't fakes. They had the washed-out look of cheap ink on home paper. Kitchen cabinets, bathroom mirror, hallway door. Out. No. Leave. I kept my face still. "Anyone else live with you?" "My son does. Jason, 14. I thought maybe he was lashing out, acting up after losing his father. He's been angry. We've been fighting. I accused him, and he cried. Said it wasn't him. Swore on his father's grave," she said. She reached into her bag again, and her hands shook when she handed me the last photograph. "This was the latest one, from just last week." Bedroom wall, white paint, cheap looking. Above the bed, written in crude letters, "God is dead." I stared at it. She didn't say anything else. The rain hit the windows harder now. Somewhere behind me, the radiator gave a tired clunk. She told me the last thing that happened was the stairs. Her son Jason had been coming down from the second floor when something shoved him hard enough to send him tumbling. 12 steps. He landed face first on the tile and screamed loud enough to wake the whole block. She said she thought he was dead. Turned out it was just a broken arm, but the look in her eyes told me it didn't matter. The real break happened somewhere else. Since then, they hadn't gone back upstairs. Clothes still in drawers, toothbrushes in the cup, beds unmade. She packed a bag that night and took her son to her mother's house a few neighborhoods over. She hadn't set foot in the place since. But she wasn't here to run from it. She wanted it back. Said the house was the last thing her husband left them. Paid off, good bones, decent yard. She talked about it like someone talking about a dog that had gone mean, something loyal that turned on them. But she wasn't ready to let go. She asked us to take the case. She didn't cry, didn't beg, but there was something in her voice that said if we said no, she'd be back at the front door of that house by nightfall with her son in tow. I told her we'd take it. I asked a few more questions, about Jason mostly. His school, friends, behavior. She answered all of them without blinking. Said he was a good kid. Smart. Sensitive. Hadn't been quite right since the funeral. When I asked who sold them the house, she went quiet for the first time. Said her husband bought it at a foreclosure auction. Didn't know who'd lived there before. We went back and forth until I was sure I'd gotten all I could from her to start the case. She was getting ready to leave when I saw it. A small silver cross hanging from a chain, clutched tight in her gloved hand. I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe she kept it hidden until now. As she stood, I caught her eyes again. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted, huh? My grandfather used to always say that. She didn't reply, but I saw her eyes mist over with tears. She nodded and smiled in that way people do when they're trying not to cry, then turned and walked out the door before anything else could crack open. The bell jingled behind her as she left. Clive watched her go, then turned to me with his eyebrows already halfway up his forehead. I didn't think you were the Bible verse type, he said. I went back to the desk, cleared the photos into a pile, and reached for the nearest mug. I'm not. Then why say it? He asked. I paused. Well, sometimes part of the job is giving someone comfort in a way they can understand, especially when their life stops making sense. Clive leaned back in his chair. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly like he understood, even if he didn't quite agree. Before we stepped foot near that house, I made Clive sit down. He was already halfway to the door, practically bouncing, with his usual mix of curiosity and caffeine. I could see it in his hands, and the way he kept checking his jacket pocket, like the keys would teleport him straight to the crime scene. That's how he worked. Chase first, think later. I reached under my desk and pulled out an old laptop. Dust on the lid, sticker half peeled from the bottom corner. It was a 2012 MacBook, one of those gray, heavy ones that used to be cutting edge before the fan started screaming after 10 minutes. I clicked it open. The screen lit up, slow but steady. Clive stared like I'd pulled a rabbit out of a hat. This still works? He asked. Better than you do, I replied. He sat reluctantly. I spun the laptop toward him and waited for the fans to settle. The thing ran like a mule. Stubborn, noisy, but dependable. Now the first thing, it's not about chasing a ghost, I began. It's asking the right questions. You don't walk into a fire before checking where the exits are. Clive muttered something, probably about the thrill of the chase, but he leaned in anyway. To his credit, when he focused, he could dig. I handed him a yellow legal pad and told him to write down everything he found. Names, dates, anything that didn't fit. He started tapping. We already knew the buyer, the husband through foreclosure. What we didn't know was the seller. That was the gap. And gaps are where the good stuff usually hides. It took about 15 minutes before Clive sat straight up. "I got something." I looked over his shoulder. The listing from the auction site was still cached. Previous owner, Diana Mercer. The name didn't mean anything to me, but Clive was already down a rabbit hole. Wasn't long before he started pulling up old newspaper scans, the kind no one looks at unless they're really trying. Not archived anywhere official, just second-rate blogs, digitized pages from a neighborhood print, probably shut down years ago. The first thing that came up was the address. It was mentioned in a half-dozen small articles about neighborhood disturbances, all of them vague. People claiming pets had gone missing. Children talking about a woman in the upstairs window when no one was home. Locals called it the witch house. Atlanta's own version of urban legend nonsense. But the more we read, the less it sounded like a campfire story. The articles stopped suddenly, all within the same year, 10 years ago. That's when the reports of the owner's death started showing up. It wasn't front page stuff, but it was too strange to ignore. According to one article, neighbors had reported a foul smell coming from the house. Not gas, not mold, something worse. The kind of smell that creeps under your door frame and settles in your clothes. When no one answered the door, police came to check on her. What they found made the news, and not just locally. She'd been dead in the bathtub. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was everything else. The time of death was very specific. 3:07 p.m. Broad daylight. The body had been drained of all blood. Not spilled. Not pooled. Drained. Every vein collapsed. Every artery flattened. Like the body had been vacuum sealed from the inside. The autopsy confirmed it. No blood anywhere in the body. Not even trace amounts. And her left hand was gone. Not severed at the wrist. Not injured. Just missing? Completely. The skin around where the hand should have been wasn't torn or mangled. It was smooth. Closed, somehow. Like it'd never been there at all. But the papers confirmed she had been born with all limbs intact. Police searched the house, the drains, the yard. No hand. They never found it. There wasn't much follow-up after that. No suspects, no motive. No one close to her, no next of kin. The case dried up. The house was emptied, boarded up, and forgotten until it reappeared at a foreclosure auction 3 years later. By then, no one remembered the name. Just the stories. And boy, there were many. Family after family came to live in that house. And family after family left. No one stayed long. Clive was ready to jump out of his chair, practically buzzing. That's it, right? The witch house. The blood, the hand. That explains everything. I didn't answer right away. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. The hum of the fan slowed down and stopped. It explains something, not everything, I replied. He frowned, like I'd just taken the wind out of his sails. Oh, come on. A woman tied to the occult dies under freaky circumstances, and now 10 years later, weird things start happening in the same house. You really think that's coincidence? No, but this is just the first piece of the puzzle. Don't start framing the picture before we've dumped out the whole box, all right? Clive sat down again, slower this time. So, What do you think we're dealing with? I reached for my coat and stood. Not a demon. He looked surprised. But Miss Monroe. Yes, she thinks it's a demon. That's understandable. She's scared, her son's hurt, and nothing about her life makes sense right now. But what we're looking at is something else. This Diana woman, she wasn't possessed. She was involved. Clive blinked. Involved how? Witches. Not the broomstick kind. Just people. People who borrow power from something else. So, wait, how's that different from a demon? Well, if it were a demon, I began, we'd be calling the Vatican. So you better hope it's not. He didn't have a response for that. Just grabbed his coat, still thinking. I locked the laptop, pocketed my notebook, and headed for the door. All right, come on. Time to see what's left of the witch house. The Monroe house looked worse in daylight. Paint stripped from the siding, like it'd given up holding on. Porch sagging under its own weight. And no curtains in the windows. Just the blank stare of a house nobody lived in anymore. When we stepped inside, the smell hit first. Wax and mothballs. The kind of stale that sticks to the back of your throat. There was melted candle wax everywhere. On shelves, table corners, dripping down onto the floors. Dozens of candles sat half-burned on every flat surface. Big ones, cheap tea lights, thick ones in jars. I counted 5 on the kitchen counter alone. That lined up. Mrs. Monroe said the electricity upstairs cut out weeks ago. If the breakers didn't fix it and the city wasn't at fault, then they probably gave up and lit candles to see in the dark. Looking around now, it was clear they'd been lighting everything by hand for a while. Clive wandered down the hall and stopped in front of a grandfather clock. The big kind, old-fashioned, dusty. The hands were stuck. He called me over and pointed to the face. 307. He didn't say anything, just walked into the kitchen and looked up at the wall clock. That one was frozen too. Same time, 307. Dead center. That was when I said it aloud. Same time Mercer died. That was the official time of death from the coroner's report. 10 years ago, middle of the afternoon, found drained in her tub. Every clock in this house was still stuck on the exact minute she died. We moved from room to room. Most looked half abandoned, like someone started packing and gave up halfway. Boxes opened but never filled. A suitcase left on the hallway floor, zipper crooked. A child's toy train left mid-setup in the living room. One of the plastic tracks had snapped. In the master bedroom, folded clothes were still sitting in a basket, like someone meant to put them away and never did. A blanket was balled up on the carpet, next to the wall, probably where someone tried to sleep without going upstairs. There wasn't much to the first floor of the house, so we decided to head upstairs. The stairs groaned under our weight as we climbed. The air on the second floor was heavier, carrying the faint smell of dust and wax. Most of the doors were open, but the one at the end of the hall was shut. The master bedroom. I pushed it open, and the first thing I saw was the writing. Black spray paint, wide strokes across the wall above the bed. God is dead. The letters bled into the drywall, uneven, harsh, but the words were unmistakable. Clive pulled something from his jacket pocket, a folded sheet of paper. He spread it open and held it up to the wall. The photo Mrs. Monroe had shown us. The same angle, the same words. The match was perfect, right down to the way the paint ran in a thick drip under the D. He stood there for a long time, eyes flicking between the photo and the wall. Then he spoke. That's from a philosopher. I remember it from a class in college. Can't remember his name, so why here? Why that quote? Why would whatever's haunting this place choose those words? He asked. I shrugged. Fear, maybe. Fear's fuel. Always has been. Clive lowered the photo and folded it again, slipping it back into his pocket. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes, more questions forming, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped deeper into the room. The carpet was flattened where the bed had been dragged aside. A dresser leaned crooked against the wall, one drawer half open, shirts spilling out like someone left in a rush. I ran my hand along the nightstand. A thin layer of dust clung to my fingers. Near the far wall, the floorboards looked off, not warped, just scuffed in a way that didn't match the rest of the room. Scrapes along the grain, faint but fresh, the kind left when something heavy gets dragged across the floor. I crouched down and ran a hand along the baseboard. Then I felt a draft that I chalked up to nothing. And that's when I saw it. A seam. Not quite a crack, but enough of a line to break the flow of the wall. I looked up and traced it with my eyes. From the floor all the way to the ceiling, just behind a leaning dresser. Clive, I said. He turned from the corner, still holding the folded photo. I nodded at the wall. He came over and helped me shift the dresser. It groaned against the floor, but slid easier than I expected. Behind it, the wallpaper was different. It was older and layered. Two patterns, one on top of the other. The outer sheet peeled at the corner. I grabbed it and pulled. It came off in long strips, revealing a narrow wooden door, barely wider than a crawlspace hatch. No knob, just a rusted latch holding it shut. I didn't like how low it was. It wasn't built with the house. It was added later, after someone decided they needed it. Clive leaned in. Think it's a closet? Not that kind. Keep your flashlight on, I said. We undid the latch and opened the door. It creaked stiffly, hinges straining against the ears. The smell changed immediately. Old wax and something else. Faint iron. The flashlight beam cut through the dark. Inside was a small, cramped room, barely big enough to stand in. The walls were scorched near the top, blackened from candle smoke. Melted wax pooled in rings on the floor. Burn marks traced symbols I didn't recognize. And in the center, a stain. Dark, brownish red, uneven. It looked like someone had once been lying there, arms spread, body limp. Clive stepped in behind me, took one look at the stain, and let out a low whistle. Well, looks like we just found Diana's secret occult room. I nodded once. Yeah, we did. Clive stayed in the doorway, documenting the ritual room with quiet focus. He circled the wax symbols, moving carefully, lifting his phone for pictures and taking his time with every detail. I left him to it, and stepped back into the bedroom. Something kept nagging at me. I couldn't put my finger on it until I stopped moving. The draft again. It brushed against my ankle once more, steady and cold, coming up from the floor. That shouldn't have been happening in a house sealed up this tight. I crouched down and scanned the baseboards. Just beneath the wall, the floor showed signs of recent scraping. Narrow lines curved against the wood, faint, but there. Something heavy had been dragged across this floor. I followed the marks to the hallway and then down the stairs. The trail carried through the living room and out the back door. The breeze was stronger outside, and the air carried that same cold I'd felt before. It led me to the side of the house, where a crawlspace hatch sat half hidden behind dry weeds and debris. The hatch wasn't locked. It had rust on it, but it had been opened recently. I knelt down and shined my flashlight inside. Most of what I saw was ordinary. Loose dirt, forgotten boards, some old insulation sagging between the beams. But something deeper in caught the light. It was pale and shaped like it didn't belong. I swore under my breath, rolled up my sleeves, took off my coat and tie, and slid inside. The crawl space had a low ceiling, just enough to move without my back hitting the beams. The ground was dry and uneven. As I moved forward, a few rats scurried past and vanished into the dark. I kept going without stopping. The further I crawled, the worse the smell became. It made me think of old meat left too long in the sun. The kind of smell that sticks in the inside of your nose. It wasn't overwhelming, but it had settled into the space. When I reached the far end, I found what I'd seen from the entrance. A human hand rested on the dirt. The skin was pale and dry, the nails neatly trimmed. A ruby ring sat on the middle finger, clean and intact. The hand wasn't decomposed, but it gave off the heavy smell of rot. The ground around it was marked. Wax had been poured in circles, some lines still clear, others cracked with age. Small bones had been placed carefully inside the patterns, not scattered, but arranged with purpose. Birds, maybe rodents. Some had been picked clean. Others still held bits of fur. A small altar stood just behind the hand. Stones were stacked with care, blackened from candle burn. Dried blood had soaked into the top layer. The source was clear. A chicken, laid across the top with its neck slit open. The body was limp and stiff, freshly placed. Wedged into the crevices of the stone were Polaroids. Most of them showed ritual scenes, dim rooms, open books, raised hands. Some faces were blurred. One of them wasn't. Diana Mercer stared back at me from the center of the group. Her face was all smiles, like she was having the time of her life. The moment settled in. This was not an overlooked detail from the original police investigation. It was not an ordinary burial either. The hand had been left here, either by Diana or one of her occult followers. It had been preserved, sat in the center of an ongoing ritual space. The witch hadn't just died in that house. Like many of her kind do, she had left a part of herself behind. This was the key. It explained the clocks, the messages, the fear, the reason the house still felt active. It also explained the accidents. Witches are known for staying tied to one place. That shows up in old stories, like Hansel and Gretel, and in real cases too, like the Rhode Island farmhouse back in 1907. The pattern's always the same. A witch makes a deal with something beyond this world, usually a demon, and gains power. That power doesn't belong to them. It's borrowed. And even after they die, the connection sometimes stays open. The house, the land, the objects, they hold onto it. What I found under the Monroe house made it clear. Diana Mercer never planned to let go of this place, even after her death. I turned and began crawling back, flashlight steady. The answer had been beneath our feet the whole time. Literally. Now I knew how to end it. We had to cleanse the house. It was time to call the priest. It was just after noon when we came back to the Monroe house. The clouds hadn't moved all morning, and the street outside was as quiet as I'd ever seen it. The house looked the same from the outside, but I knew what was under it now. I knew what had to be done. Clive and I didn't come alone this time. I'd called in someone I trusted, Father Daniel. He was an old friend of mine, and he wasn't the type to give long sermons, just quiet words and steady hands. He brought a small bag with him, filled with holy water, a worn crucifix, and a Bible held together with tape. He didn't ask too many questions. He never did when I called. I laid out the plan on the porch before we went in. Each of us would take one space. We needed to cut this thing off from every angle. Father Daniel would walk through the house with prayer and water, blessing the thresholds and corners. Clive would head back up to the hidden ritual room to scrub out the wax circles and burn whatever Diana had left behind. As for me, I was going under. The hand needed to be buried and sealed. Everyone nodded, and then we went in. Father Daniel started in the living room, murmuring words I'd heard him say 1,000 times before under different circumstances. I watched him for a second before heading out the back and around the house to the crawl space. The hatch creaked open as I pulled it loose. The cold draft hit again. I dropped to my knees, flashlight in one hand, small wooden box in the other. Inside the box was salt, packed tight. I crawled back through the same tunnel, the dirt dry beneath my palms. The rats were gone this time. The crawl felt longer now, like the house knew I was here to end something. I reached the same spot. The altar, the bones, the wax, all exactly how I left them. I moved the stones aside and cleared a shallow hole in the dirt. The wax cracked under my hands, flaking apart like old paint. Then, I took Diana's severed hand and placed it in the box, covering it under a thick layer of salt after wrapping it in linen. I filled the hole and the rest of the spiritual space with even more salt, cleansing the area clean. I was done when there wasn't a trace of wax or bones left. I sat back, hands resting on my knees, and looked at the ground one last time. "That's enough now," I said. The house responded as if it heard me. It started as a low rumble beneath me. The crawl space shook hard, knocking dust loose from the beams above. The ground trembled. I pressed my hands to the dirt and waited. Then, with a sharp crack, the world jolted. Wood groaned all around me, and the sound of glass shattering tore through the air above. And then it stopped. Silence followed. Total stillness. I didn't move until it was over. When I was sure nothing else was coming, I turned around and crawled back the way I came. My flashlight beam trembled slightly, dust still drifting through the crawl space. At the entrance, I climbed out, carrying the box with me. The wind outside had picked up just enough to rustle the trees. From where I stood, I could see the windows. Every single one had shattered outward. Jagged glass framed the edges, and shards littered the porch and sidewalk. It looked like the house had exhaled all at once. I stepped through the front door. The living room was covered in broken glass. Father Daniel stood in the very middle of it, still holding his old Bible. A wet streak ran down one wall where the holy water had splashed. He looked at me and gave a short nod. Upstairs, Clive came down slowly, holding his cheek. A thin cut ran just under his eye. Fresh, but not deep. It would scar, though. He looked around, eyes wide, and then locked eyes with me. Is it over? I nodded. It was over. It'd been a few days since we finished the job. The Monroe house was quiet now. No more flickering lights, no more words on the wall. The second floor still needed repairs, and the windows had all been boarded up after the glass blew out. But the house itself was clean. For the first time in a long while, it was just a house again. Mrs. Monroe called and asked if she could stop by the office. I told her she was welcome any time. She arrived in the same black dress she wore the first time, but it looked different now. She stood straighter. Her face looked rested. No makeup today, no sunglasses. Her eyes were tired, but they were clear. Clive greeted her at the door. She sat across from me, folding her hands tightly in her lap. And I told her everything. I explained that the house wasn't haunted in the way people imagine. Diana Mercer, the woman who lived there before, had been a practicing occultist. She wasn't born with power. She made a deal with something. That kind of deal always leaves a trace. Before she died, she left behind more than a memory. She left behind a part of herself. Her hand, hidden under the house, preserved and placed at the center of an altar. That hand acted like a cord tying her to the house. As long as it remained, her influence stayed. The Monroe family was not imagining it. The house really had turned against them. Clive filled in the rest. He told her about the ritual room upstairs, the symbols, the wax circles, and the bones. He explained how he cleansed each space. We didn't leave anything behind. Mrs. Monroe stared down at her lap while we spoke. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she looked up with eyes glassy from held-back tears. She didn't cry, but her voice caught when she thanked us. She stood and reached into her purse, pulling out a thick envelope. She placed it on the desk between us. Then she left, back into the alley, into the city that hadn't stopped moving since the case began. Clive leaned against his desk and watched her go. He waited until the door clicked shut, then turned toward me. You said something earlier about what you found under the house. I nodded. I already knew what was coming. You said there was a chicken. Dead. Fresh. I nodded. He crossed his arms and looked at the floor. But Diana's been dead for 10 years, so she couldn't have done that. That means someone else was feeding the ritual, keeping it going. He let that settle for a second. "Exactly," I replied. "It wasn't an accident. That chicken had been laid there as an offering. Not random. Someone else knew about the ritual and had been trying to keep it alive. Whether they were part of Diana's group or found her notes later, I couldn't say. But the meaning was clear. Someone had continued her work. Without that sacrifice, the spell would have died years ago." Clive didn't like that. I could see it on his face. So they're still out there?" he asked. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter. We broke the connection. Without the hand, without the altar, there's nothing left to feed. Whoever they were, they don't have power anymore." He nodded slowly, not happy, but understanding. Outside, the rain in Atlanta hadn't stopped. It pattered against the office windows as Clive poured another mug of whatever passed for coffee that day. The envelope from Mrs. Monroe sat in the desk drawer, unopened. Later, as we looked back and reviewed, we dubbed this the Monroe witch case. You see, not every job ends with all the answers. Some just end. But the house was quiet now, and the family was safe. I listened to the rain outside and stared out the window. Sooner or later, the next person would walk through our door with a story they couldn't explain, and we'd be ready.
Hey everyone, Steven here. I hope you enjoyed the story. In case you haven't watched it yet, just so you know, the full Daggerland series is on the channel. It's about 4.5 hours, and I think you'll really like it. So if you haven't finished the Daggerland series and you'd like something to do, check it out. I will try to put a video link on screen. Also, check out our new Daggerland merch at hauntedstuff.com. There's a link in the description. Thank you for listening and all the support, and I hope you have a great weekend. My name is Jason Miller, and I work night search and rescue out of the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station in Yellowstone National Park. If you've ever driven through the north side of the park, you've probably passed our station without noticing it. It sits just off US Route 191, a few miles south of Gardner, tucked behind a gravel parking lot and a maintenance garage the size of a small warehouse. During the day, the place is busy. Rangers move in and out of the building, tourists stop to ask for maps, and parked trucks roll through the lot with coolers, radio gear, and toolboxes rattling in the back. At night, it's different. Most of the lights stay off, the front doors lock, and the only people still working are the Rangers on the night rotation. That's where I come in. The night shift covers everything that happens in the park after most visitors have gone to sleep. Car accidents on Highway 89, injured hikers who stayed on the trail too long, campers who wander away from their sites after a few drinks and can't find their way back in the dark. A lot of the calls start the same way. Someone reports a missing person, or a vehicle sitting on the side of the road with the driver gone. Sometimes it's nothing. Someone takes a wrong turn, realizes their mistake, and walks back to the campground before we even get there. Other times, it's not nothing. Most nights, I work with one other ranger and a radio dispatcher inside the station. The trucks stay fueled and parked in a row beside the garage doors so we can get moving quickly. Each truck carries the same gear: trauma kits, rope bags, extra radios, thermal blankets, and floodlights that can turn a dark patch of forest into something that looks like a football stadium. When a call comes in, we grab the closest truck and we drive. If you've never been in Yellowstone after midnight, it's hard to explain how quiet the park gets. The main roads empty out. The campgrounds go dark, one by one. Even the animals seem to disappear for a while. The only sounds left are wind moving through the trees and the engine of the truck rolling along the road. That quiet is why the night shift exists. People underestimate how big Yellowstone really is. The park spreads across 3 states and more than 2 million acres of mountains, forest, rivers, and open valleys. Once the sun goes down, it becomes very easy for someone to step off a trail and disappear into that much wilderness. The official training manuals cover most of what we deal with: wildlife encounters, hypothermia, river crossings, how to organize a search grid when someone goes missing in rough terrain. I read all those manuals during my first week on the job. But there's another set of rules the manuals don't mention. I learned about those during my first night shift. The ranger who trained me was a guy named Kevin Derby. Kevin ran night operations out of the Tower Roosevelt Station and had been doing it longer than anybody else on the roster. On my first night, he walked me through the truck, showed me where the rescue gear was stored, and made sure I knew how to operate the radio system. After that, he handed me a cup of coffee and sat down across the table in the break room. "Before we start the shift," Kevin said, "there are a few things you should know." I assumed he meant the usual training stuff. Maybe certain trails where people got lost more often, or roads where tourists like to drive too fast at night. Instead, he gave me 6 rules. None of them were written down, none of them appeared in the training manuals, and every single one of them sounded ridiculous. One rule said if you saw a bear with glowing eyes, you were supposed to stay perfectly still. Another rule involved carrying green Tic Tacs during missing child searches. There was one about staircases in the woods that didn't make any sense at all. I remember laughing when he finished. Kevin didn't laugh. "Listen," he said, "you don't have to believe any of this. I didn't when I started either. But these rules exist because someone broke them once." He took a sip of coffee and looked out the window toward the dark trees behind the station. "Some of those people, they didn't come back." I didn't know Kevin well enough at the time to tell if he was joking or trying to scare the new guy. Most ranger stations have their share of stories, and Yellowstone is full of old ones. People disappear in big wilderness areas sometimes. Happens in every national park. But Kevin didn't tell those rules like a ghost story. He told them like procedures. 3 years later, I worked the same night shift he trained me on. I've responded to enough calls along the roads and trails north of Tower Junction to know how quickly a normal search can turn into something else. I've seen enough strange things in the woods to stop laughing when someone mentions the rules. If you ever work nights out here, you'll hear them eventually. And if you're smart, you'll follow them. The first one is about bears. Rule 1. If you see a bear with glowing eyes, stay perfectly still. It can't see you if you don't move. The first time I saw the bear was about 6 months after I started working nights. Late September, the kind of cold night where the air feels dry and sharp in your lungs. I was riding with Kevin Derby that evening. We just finished checking a stalled vehicle along Highway 89 near Gardner, and we're heading back toward the Tower Roosevelt Station. About 2 miles before the junction, the radio crackled. "Tower unit, possible animal disturbance at Bear Creek Campground," the dispatcher began. "Campers reporting a large animal knocking over food lockers." Kevin reached over and turned the radio volume down a little. "That'll be a bear," he began. "Happens every week." We turned off the highway and drove north along a narrow campground access road. The headlights swept across empty picnic tables, metal food lockers, and a few parked RVs with their lights turned off. Bear Creek Campground is small compared to most places in Yellowstone. Maybe 20 campsites, a restroom building, and a gravel loop road that circles through a patch of pine trees. Kevin shut off the truck engine when we reached the center of the loop. "Let's check the lockers first," he said. We stepped out with flashlights. The cold air carried the smell of wet dirt and pine needles. Somewhere deeper in the campground, something metallic clanged. Kevin pointed his light toward the sound.
Probably got in someone's cooler. We walked down the gravel road toward a row of food lockers near a picnic table. One of the metal doors was hanging open, and trash bags were scattered across the ground. Kevin crouched beside the mess and inspected the claw marks on the locker door. "Big one," he said. And that's when I heard breathing. Slow and heavy. I turned my flashlight toward the road behind us. A bear stood about 30 yards away. At first, nothing about it seemed too unusual. It was a large black bear, maybe 6 feet tall when it lifted its head. Its fur looked wet along the shoulders, and its front legs were covered in mud. And then the eyes caught the light. They didn't reflect the beam the way animal eyes usually do. They glowed. Not bright, like a flashlight reflection. The color was dull and steady, like a green light buried deep inside the skull. The bear took a step forward. Kevin saw it the same moment I did. "Don't move," he said. The word snapped something loose in my memory. Kevin had mentioned this exact situation during my first week on the job. At the time, I thought it was a joke. If you see a bear with glowing eyes, stay perfectly still. The bear walked closer. Each step landed with a soft crunch on the gravel road. Its head tilted slightly from side to side, as if it were listening instead of looking. Kevin stood completely still beside the food locker. I forced myself not to shift my weight. The bear stopped about 15 feet away. It lifted its nose and sniffed the air. The smell hit me. Wet fur mixed with something sour, like rotting meat. The bear stepped toward Kevin, and Kevin didn't move. It circled slowly, passing within a few feet of him. The green glow in its eyes stayed fixed on the space in front of him, but its head turned strangely as it walked, almost like it was trying to locate something by sound. And then my boot slid on the gravel. Wasn't a full step, just a tiny shift, and the bear's head snapped toward me instantly. Before I could react, it changed. The animal covered the distance in 2 seconds. Its claws scraped across the road as it lunged straight at the spot where the noise came from. I froze. The bear stopped just inches from me. Its nose hovered a few inches from my chest. Hot breath poured out of its mouth. I could see scars along the side of its muzzle and patches where the fur had fallen away. The glowing eyes stared straight ahead, not at me, at the space where the sound had been. I didn't move. Seconds passed, and then the bear turned its head slightly and sniffed again. Its ears twitched toward the trees at the edge of the campground. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest. The bear spun toward the sound and charged into the darkness. The trees shook for a moment as it crashed through the underbrush. And then everything went quiet again. I let out the breath I'd been holding. Kevin finally moved. "Now you know why the rule exists," he said. I turned toward him, still shaking. "That thing almost killed me." Kevin shook his head. "No, you almost killed yourself." He walked back toward the truck and gestured for me to follow. "That animal can't see the way normal bears do. It hunts by movement and sound." I climbed into the passenger seat and shut the door. Kevin started the engine. "If you move, it finds you," he said. He pulled the truck back onto the campground road and drove slowly toward the highway. "And if you stay still, sometimes it doesn't." He glanced over at me once. "That's rule 1. Rule 2. If you're searching for a missing child, bring green Tic Tacs. The first time I had to use that rule was the following spring. Early May, it's a strange time in Yellowstone. The snow starts melting in the valleys, the rivers run high, and the park begins filling with visitors again. Campgrounds reopen, The roads get busy, and the ranger station phones start ringing every hour with someone asking about weather, wildlife, or trail conditions. Most of those calls happen during the day. The bad ones, they usually come at night. The call came in a little after 9:30 p.m. I was sitting at the desk inside the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station finishing paperwork from a medical call earlier in the evening when the radio cracked alive.
Tower unit, we've got a missing child at Pine Creek Campground.
The dispatcher sounded calm, but the words made the room feel colder. Age? Kevin Derby asked from across the road.
7 years old, male, name is Tyler Cooper. Last seen about 20 minutes ago near the restroom building.
Kevin stood up immediately. All right, he said into the radio. Notify park law enforcement and start logging units. We're on our way. He grabbed the truck keys from the hook beside the door and tossed them to me. Let's move. We drove south along US Route 191 with the emergency lights flashing across the trees. Pine Creek Campground sits about 10 minutes from the Tower Roosevelt station, tucked into a narrow patch of forest beside a shallow stream. When we arrived, 2 park law enforcement trucks were already parked near the campground entrance. A small group of campers stood near the restroom building, talking in quiet voices. A woman was crying. Kevin shut off the engine and stepped out of the truck. A ranger from law enforcement walked over. Parents say the kid was playing near their campsite, the ranger said. They looked away for a minute and he was gone. Kevin nodded. Is there a trail nearby? Yeah, the ranger said. Lost Lake Trail starts about a quarter-mile east. Kevin turned to me. Grab the searchlights and your radio. I stepped out of the truck and opened the rear compartment where the gear was stored. That's when Kevin reached into his jacket pocket and held something out to me. A small plastic box. Green Tic Tacs. I stared at it. You're serious? Kevin didn't smile. Take them. I slipped the box into my jacket pocket. Within 10 minutes, the search team had spread out across the campground area. Law enforcement covered the roads and parking lots, while Kevin and I headed toward the trail that ran behind the campsites. Lost Lake Trail begins with a narrow dirt path that winds through a patch of pine trees before climbing up toward the hills. Kevin stopped at the trailhead. All right, you take the trail side, I'll work the ridge. I nodded. We switched on our flashlights, and we moved into the woods. The trail followed the creek for the first 100 yards before splitting into 2 directions. I took the path that stayed close to the water. The beam of my flashlight bounced across rocks, tree trunks, and patches of wet dirt. Tyler, I called out. My voice disappeared into the trees. The only sound that came back was water moving slowly over stones in the creek. I kept walking. About 15 minutes into the search, the trail began narrowing as it curved around a small hill. The ground sloped downward toward the creek, and the trees grew thicker along the bank. I stopped and listened. Something moved above me. Wings. I tilted my flashlight upward. A crow sat on the wooden trail sign about 20 feet ahead of me. The bird watched me. It didn't fly away. I remembered Kevin mentioning the crow once during a conversation about missing persons. The Rangers had a nickname for it. They called it Tic Tac. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket, and I pulled out the small plastic box. The crow tilted its head at me. I opened the lid, and I shook a few of the green Tic Tacs into my hand, and then I crouched down and placed them on a flat rock beside the trail. The crow flew down immediately. It grabbed one of the candies in its beak, hopped back a step, and swallowed it. And then it looked at me. The bird lifted off the rock and flew deeper into the trees. I waited. About 20 feet ahead, it landed on a low branch and turned back toward me. I followed. The crow flew again. Each time it landed, it waited until I caught up before moving again. The bird guided me off the main trail and down a narrow slope that led toward a dry creek bed. The ground there was uneven and covered in fallen branches. And then my flashlight caught something blue. A jacket. I ran forward. A small boy lay on the ground beside a fallen tree trunk. His arms were wrapped around his stomach, and his face was pale under the beam of the flashlight. "Tyler," I said. The boy didn't respond. I knelt down and felt his neck. Pulse, weak but steady. His lips were dry and cracked. The ground around him was scattered with pine needles and dirt, like he tried to crawl before collapsing. I grabbed my radio. "Tower unit to command. I've located the missing child, alive but unresponsive. The coordinates near the creek bend east of Lost Lake Trail." The radio burst with replies as the other search teams moved toward my location. I looked back toward the trees. The crow was gone. Kevin reached me first with 2 other rangers carrying a stretcher. "Nice work," he said, as we lifted the boy carefully onto it. The boy opened his eyes slightly as we carried him up the slope toward the trail. Later that night, after the boy had been taken to the medical clinic near Gardner, Kevin and I returned to the ranger station. I set the empty Tic Tac box on the desk. "You want to explain that?" I asked. Kevin picked up the box, then turned it over in his hands. "Well, Tic Tac helps us find kids," he said. "Why?" Kevin shrugged. "I have no idea." He set the box back on the desk. "All I know is that the bird likes the green ones." Rule 3. If you see cats in the trees, do not turn your back to them. Back away slowly. I didn't believe that rule either the first time Kevin Derby mentioned it. At the time, it sounded like common sense advice about mountain lions. Yellowstone has plenty of them. And most rangers know the basics. Don't run, make yourself look bigger, maintain eye contact. But Kevin was very specific about one part. Don't turn your back. Not even for a second, he said. The way he said it made it sound less like wildlife advice and more like survival instructions. I learned why a few months later. It was late August, near the end of the busy season, when the park still had tourists, but the nights were starting to cool down. Kevin had the night off that evening, so I was paired with another ranger named Adam Turner. Adam worked days most of the year and only picked up night shifts when the schedule got thin. Around midnight, the radio dispatcher called in a report from a group of hikers who'd returned late from Bear Ridge Trail. They said they heard something moving in the trees above the trail while they were hiking out. They didn't see what it was, but they said branches kept shaking over their heads the whole way down. Adam grabbed the keys to the truck. "It's probably a mountain lion," he said. We drove east along US Route 191 for a few minutes before turning onto the gravel access road that leads toward Bear Ridge Trail. The road runs along a stretch of forest where the trees grow thick and close together, blocking most of the moonlight. Adam parked the truck near the trailhead sign. "You ready?" he asked. I grabbed my flashlight and radio. We stepped onto the trail. Bear Ridge Trail climbs gradually into the hills east of the road. The path starts wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, but after a few hundred yards, it narrows to a single track that winds between tall pine trees. The only sounds were our boots crunching on dirt and the wind moving through the branches above us. About 5 minutes into the hike, Adam stopped. Did you hear that?" I listened. Something moved in the trees, not on the ground. Above us, a branch shifted somewhere to our left. Then another branch moved farther ahead. I tilted my flashlight upward. 2 glowing eyes stared back at me from a thick branch about 20 feet above the trail. The shape behind the eyes looked like a mountain lion, and then another pair of eyes appeared on a different branch, and another. 3 cats sat in the trees above the trail, and all of them were watching us. Adam stepped backward. That's weird. Mountain lions don't usually travel in groups. One of the cats shifted its weight and moved along the branch. The movement was smooth and silent. Its body stretched across the limb like it'd been there for hours. Another cat climbed down slightly from its branch and crouched lower. Adam turned his flashlight toward it. That one's big. The animal was easily larger than any mountain lion I had seen before. The beam of my flashlight moved across the trees. More eyes appeared. 4, then 5. The cats were spread out across the branches above the trail, all facing the same direction. Toward us. Adam took another step backward. I think we should get back to the truck, he said. That's fine, I said, just don't turn around. He looked at me. What? Don't turn your back, I said. Adam shifted his weight again. Why? But before I could answer, one of the cats moved. It didn't jump down. It walked along the branch above us, staying directly over the trail. The others followed. The cats were tracking our movement from above. Okay, Adam began. That's not normal. We started backing down the trail together. Our flashlight stayed pointed upward as we moved. The cats continued pacing along the branches, moving tree to tree above us. One of them dropped lower on the trunk of a pine tree until it was only about 10 feet above the ground. Adam stopped. That thing's following us, he said. Keep backing up, I told him. We moved slowly down the trail for another 30 yards. And then Adam made a mistake. He turned his head slightly and glanced behind him toward the direction of the truck. And one of the cats dropped from the branch instantly. The animal landed on the trail behind us with a heavy thud. Adam spun around. Don't run, I said. The cat crouched low on the dirt path. Its tail flicked slowly behind it. The muscles in its shoulders tightened like it was preparing to jump. Adam froze. The other cats stopped moving in the trees above us, and everything went quiet. I slowly reached for the flashlight mounted on my belt and clicked it on. The second beam of light hit the cat directly in the face. It blinked once, and then it turned and leaped back into the trees. Within seconds, the rest of the cats disappeared into the darkness above the trail. Adam and I stood there for a moment listening. Nothing moved. We backed the rest of the way down the trail and reached the truck without saying another word. Adam didn't speak until we were halfway back to the ranger station. How many were there? I counted 5, I said. He stared out the window at the dark forest passing by. Mountain lions, they don't hunt like that. No, they don't, I said. When we reached the station, Kevin was sitting at the desk finishing paperwork from another call. He looked up as we walked in. You guys run into something? He asked. Adam nodded slowly. Cats, he said. Rule 4. If you hear dead relatives over the radio, turn the radio off and don't look outside for the rest of the night. The first time that rule mattered, I was alone at the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station. Kevin had taken a day off, and Adam Turner was working a different district that night. That left me covering the radio desk and the truck bay until morning. Nights like that happen a few times every season, when schedules overlap or somebody calls out sick. The station sits just off US Route 191, north of the Lamar Valley area. After midnight, there's almost no traffic on that stretch of road. Occasionally a car passes, heading toward Gardner, but most nights the only vehicles moving through that part of the park belong to rangers or park maintenance crews. That night, A storm had moved through earlier in the evening. By the time midnight came around, the snow had stopped, but a thin layer still covered the ground outside the station. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the trucks parked beside the garage. Inside the building, everything was quiet. I sat at the radio desk finishing a report from a minor vehicle accident that had happened earlier along Highway 89. The heater hummed softly in the corner of the room. The radio stayed silent for nearly an hour, and then it clicked. First, I assumed it was just static. Radios in the park pick up strange interference sometimes, especially during bad weather. The speaker crackled once and then went quiet again. I kept writing. A few seconds later, the speaker clicked again. "Jason?" The voice was clear. It came through the radio speaker like a normal transmission. I froze. Jason, you there?" The voice belonged to my brother, Mark Miller. He died in a car accident 4 years before I ever started working in Yellowstone. For a moment, I just stared at the radio. "Jason?" the voice said again. The transmission sounded slightly distorted, like someone speaking through a weak signal. "I'm outside," the voice continued. "Can you open the door?" My eyes moved toward the front window of the station. Snow covered the ground outside the building. The porch light illuminated the wooden steps leading up to the entrance. The trees behind the station swayed slightly in the wind. No one stood on the porch. The radio clicked again. "Jason, I'm freezing out here." The voice sounded exactly like him. Same tone, same rhythm in the way he spoke. For a moment, my chair scraped against the floor as I started to stand. And then something Kevin Derby had said months earlier surfaced in my head. If you hear a dead relative over the radio, turn it off and don't look outside. The radio crackled again. "Jason, I know you can hear me." My hand moved toward the radio controls. The voice sounded closer this time, almost impatient. "Just open the door." I shut the radio off. The room fell silent instantly. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and then I heard footsteps outside. They moved slowly across the wooden porch. The sound traveled along the front wall of the station toward the window beside the desk. I kept my eyes on the paperwork in front of me. Another step. Something stopped just outside the glass. I could feel a presence on the other side of the window without looking up. The porch light still cast shadows across the snow outside, but I refused to turn my head. The footsteps moved again. They circled the building slowly. Snow crunched beneath heavy weight as whatever was outside walked past the window, along the wall, and around the back of the ranger station. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes. The heater continued humming beside the desk. Outside, the footsteps moved around the building again. The sound passed the window a second time, then a third. Eventually, the noises stopped. I didn't move from the chair until the sky outside the window began turning gray with the early morning light. When the sun rose above the tree line, I finally stood and walked toward the door. I opened it slowly, and cold air rushed inside. The snow around the ranger station was covered in tracks. Large footprints circled the entire building. Each print was deep enough to show the shape clearly. They were human, but they were far too large to belong to any person. The track stopped directly in front of the door, right where the voice had said it was standing. Rule 5. If you see a staircase in the woods, burn it. I didn't see the staircase until my second year working nights in Yellowstone. By then I'd already dealt with the bear, the cats, and the radio incident. Those things had taught me that Kevin Derby's rules existed for a reason. I still didn't understand them all, but I'd stopped arguing about them. The staircase showed up during a missing hiker search. The call came in just after 11 p.m. A man named Daniel Foster had failed to return from a solo hike along Lost Lake Trail. His truck was still parked at the trailhead, and his campsite at Pine Creek Campground was empty. Several teams had already been working the area for several hours when Kevin and I arrived. 2 law enforcement rangers were checking the lower part of the trail, while a volunteer team worked the ridge above the creek. Kevin decided we would search the stretch of forest that runs between the trail and an old fire road farther east. We parked the truck near the trailhead, and we grabbed our gear. "Stick close," Kevin said as we stepped into the trees. The forest around Lost Lake Trail is dense even during the day. At night, the branches block most of the moonlight, leaving only narrow beams from our flashlights cutting through the dark. We followed a faint path running parallel to the main trail. The ground was soft with pine needles and patches of wet soil. Somewhere nearby, water moved slowly through the creek. For the first 20 minutes, we didn't find anything. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign the missing hiker had passed through the area. Kevin stopped near a cluster of large rocks. "Let's cut east," he began. "That fire road should be about 100 yards that way." We turned off the faint path and started moving through thicker trees. Fallen branches snapped under our boots as we pushed deeper into the forest. And then my flashlight hit something that didn't belong there. Wood. Straight lines. I stopped walking. Kevin?" He turned and followed the beam of my flashlight. A staircase stood in the middle of the woods. It was made of dark wood, maybe 10 steps tall, with narrow railings on both sides. The structure looked old but intact, like it'd been part of a house or a cabin at some point. Except there was no house, no walls, no foundation. Just a staircase rising out of the dirt. Kevin walked closer and shined his flashlight along the steps. The wood looked dry and weathered, but the edges were clean. No rot, no broken boards. "How does that even get here?" I asked. Kevin didn't answer. He walked around the staircase slowly, inspecting the ground near the base. There were no tracks, no tire marks, no debris from a collapsed building. Nothing. "Don't touch it," Kevin said. I stepped back. He reached into his radio pouch and switched channels. "Command, this is Tower Unit," he began. "We're shifting the search east of Lost Lake Trail. Possible structure located in the woods." The dispatcher acknowledged the message. Kevin clipped the radio back onto his jacket and looked at the staircase again. "We're burning it." I blinked. "What?" Kevin pointed toward the truck. "Gas cans in the back compartment." "You're serious?" "Yes." I jogged back toward the direction of the trail until the beam of the truck's headlights appeared through the trees. The gas can sat exactly where Kevin said it would be, beside the spare batteries and rope bags. I carried it back through the forest. Kevin was still standing near the staircase when I returned. He took the gas can and began pouring fuel across the wooden steps. The liquid soaked into the boards and dripped onto the dirt below. "Any idea what this is?" I asked. Kevin shook his head. "All I know is that we don't leave him standing." He handed the can back to me. "Step away." I moved several yards back through the trees. Kevin pulled a lighter from his pocket and flicked it open. For a moment, the flame illuminated the staircase clearly, and then he dropped the lighter onto the fuel-soaked wood. The fire spread instantly. Orange flames climbed the steps and wrapped around the railings. The dry wood cracked loudly as the heat intensified. I heard something move in the forest behind us then. A branch snapped, then another. Kevin didn't turn toward the sound. "Stay focused," he said. The staircase burned hotter as the flames climbed higher. Smoke drifted upward through the branches overhead. Something heavy moved through the trees again, closer this time. I turned my flashlight toward the noise. The beam caught nothing but trunks and leaves. The fire consumed the steps one by one. Boards collapsed inward as the structure weakened. And eventually the entire staircase fell apart. The last pieces burned down to glowing embers scattered across the ground. The forest went quiet again. Kevin kicked dirt across the remaining flames until only smoke remained. We stood there for a moment listening. Nothing moved in the trees. Kevin finally turned toward the direction of the trail. "All right, let's get back to the search." Well, we found Daniel Foster about an hour later, sitting beside the creek a half-mile away. He'd twisted his ankle and couldn't walk back to the trail on his own. As we helped him out of the stretcher, I glanced once toward the dark forest where the staircase had stood. Nothing was there anymore, just trees and dirt. Rule 6. If you take a picture and there's a person in it you don't remember seeing, burn the photo. Things can come alive through photos. The photo incident happened last fall. By that point, I'd been working nights out of the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station for almost 3 years. I'd seen enough strange things in the park to stop questioning Kevin's rules. I didn't always understand them, but I followed him. The call that night started like a normal search. A couple reported hearing someone yelling near Bear Ridge Trail just after sunset. They said the voice sounded like it was coming from deeper in the woods, somewhere off the trail. When they tried to follow the sound, it stopped. Kevin and I drove out to the trailhead along US Route 191 and parked the trail near the entrance sign. "Probably someone just messing around in the trees," Kevin said. We grabbed our radios and flashlights and started walking the trail. Bear Ridge Trail runs through a narrow stretch of forest before climbing toward a rocky overlook that faces the valley. The lower section of the trail stays mostly flat and winds through thick pine trees. About 10 minutes into the search, Kevin stopped. "Take some photos," he said. "For what?" "For the report," he replied. "We document this area whenever we check a location like this." I pulled my phone out and turned on the camera. The flash lit up the trees ahead of us. I took a photo of the trail marker, then another of the surrounding woods. Kevin walked a few yards ahead and scanned the ground with his flashlight, while I took 2 more pictures showing the direction of the trail and the nearby trees. We didn't find anything unusual. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had actually been yelling in that area. Kevin shrugged. "Probably someone down in the valley," he said. We walked back to the truck and drove to the next area the dispatcher wanted us to check. By the time we returned to the ranger station, it was close to 2 in the morning. Kevin went to the break room to grab coffee, while I sat down at the desk to start writing the incident report. Part of that process involved uploading any photos taken during the search. I opened the camera roll on my phone. The first photo showed the trail marker exactly the way I remembered it. The second photo showed the trees beside the trail. But the third photo made me pause. Someone stood in the background. The figure was partially hidden behind a pine tree, about 20 feet behind Kevin. I leaned closer to the screen. The man wore dark clothing and stood completely still. His face looked pale. I knew immediately that he had not been there when I took the photo. I would have seen him. Kevin walked back into the room carrying his coffee mug. "You finished the report yet?" "Look at this," I said. He stepped beside the desk and looked down at the phone. For a moment, he didn't say anything. And then he set the mug down slowly. "Scroll," he said. I swiped to the next photo. The same trail appeared on the screen, the same trees, the same spot behind Kevin. The man was closer now. He stood fully in the open now, facing the camera. Kevin grabbed the phone from my hand then. "Stop," he said. He walked to the printer beside the desk and connected the phone with a cable. Within seconds, the printer spit out the photo onto a sheet of paper. Kevin carried the printout outside behind the ranger station, where an old metal burn barrel sat beside the maintenance shed. He dropped the photo inside and struck a match. The paper curled as the flames spread across the image. For a moment, the man's face burned orange in the firelight, and then the photo turned to ash. Kevin watched the barrel for a few seconds before walking back toward the station. When I checked my phone again, the photo was gone. The camera roll jumped from the second picture straight to the fifth. The man had disappeared. Kevin picked up his coffee mug and sat back down at the desk. "Sometimes things notice you through pictures." And that was all Kevin told me. Now, most people think the dangerous part of Yellowstone happens during the day. They think about grizzly bears on hiking trails, tourists getting too close to bison, or someone slipping near one of the hot springs. The Park Service posts warning signs everywhere about those things. Rangers give safety talks. Visitors read pamphlets before heading out onto the trails. Those dangers are real. But night is different. When the sun drops behind the mountains, most of the park shuts down. Campground lights turn off. Visitor centers close. The roads empty out except for the occasional car heading toward Gardner or deeper into Yellowstone National Park. And that's when the night shift starts. The Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station stays open 24 hours a day, even when everything else goes quiet. Someone always monitors the radio. Someone always keeps a truck ready to roll if a call comes in. Sometimes those calls are normal. A driver hits a deer on Highway 89 and needs help getting off the road. A camper twists an ankle on Lost Lake Trail and can't walk back to the parking lot. A group of hikers misreads a map and ends up on the wrong trail after sunset. We handle those situations the way any search and rescue team would. We grab our gear, follow the trail, and bring back people safely. But the night rangers also deal with the other things. The things Kevin Derby warned me about during my night shift. Over the years, I've learned that those rules don't exist because someone thought they sounded interesting. Every one of them started with an incident report somewhere in the park's history. A ranger who moved when the bear got close. A search team that ignored the crow. Someone who ran when the cats came down from the trees. Someone who opened the door when the dead voice called from outside. Someone who climbed the staircase. Someone who kept the photograph. The details of those reports don't always make it into the official reports. Sometimes the paperwork just says a ranger went missing during a search or failed to return from patrol. But the people who work nights in Yellowstone, we know the rest of the story. Kevin Derby still runs the night shift most weeks. I've seen him give the same talk to new rangers that he gave me years ago. He sits across the table in the break room with a cup of coffee and explains the rules one at a time. Most of them laugh the first time they hear it. I did. And then they work a few night shifts in the park. And eventually something happens. Maybe they hear a voice on the radio that shouldn't be there. Maybe they notice something moving in the trees above a trail. Maybe they find a staircase where no building has ever stood. After that, they stop laughing. Yellowstone. It's one of the largest national parks in the U.S. Millions of visitors drive through it every year. They take photos, hike the trails, and watch wildlife in the valleys during the day. Most of them leave before the park gets truly dark. The few who stay overnight usually fall asleep inside their tents or RVs without realizing just how quiet the forest becomes around them. That quiet is when the night rangers start paying attention, because the wilderness doesn't belong to us after dark. We just patrol it.